Chapter 1604. From afar, the light flickered in the starry sky as if it was blinking. That's strange. Why is the light flickering? Li Shi asked. Bai Xiaowen said, it's said that the entrance to this secret realm is in a meteorite belt. That's why there are some changes in the light. Captain, you can't come with us, right? Qiao Rui reminded him. Bai Xiaowen nodded. That's right. When I was chatting with the Hornet Queen, I said that the four of you should go and explore. It's not appropriate for me to appear, lest I become the target of everyone's attention. As he spoke, Bai Xiaowen bent down slightly and wiped his face. Using the transformation technique, Bai Xiaowen's figure changed from tall and slender to hunchbacked. Wrinkles appeared on his face and he even grew a beard. He looked like a completely different person. So this is the effect of the transformation technique. It's really hard to understand. Qiao Rui reached out and touched Bai Xiaowen's beard. He realized that the beard, which looked real, was actually like a projection. It could be seen but not touched. Strangely, Qiao Rui scanned it with his spiritual awareness, but he couldn't tell if the beard was real or fake. Bai Xiaowen smiled and said, I don't know much about the Black-Tooth secret realm. Everyone, be careful. Don't meet me before the secret realm opens. I'll meet up with you inside the secret realm. After Li Shi and the other three agreed, they flew towards the light. Bai Xiaowen waited for half an hour. When he saw that Li Shi and the others were out of sight, he began to fly. Along the way, he saw many strange sights in the universe. Even evolvers who had transcended the level of mortals were shocked by the majestic universe and felt their own insignificance. The light seemed very close, but it was actually very far away. In addition, Bai Xiaowen had just learned how to fly using elemental energy, so his flying speed was not fast. It took him a total of 2 to 3 hours to reach the location of the light. Just as the information said, there was an endless meteorite belt in front of them. Moreover, the meteorites were all in a state of slow rotation. Occasionally, there would be light collisions between two meteorites, which would slightly change their trajectories. On a large meteorite in the central region, there was a glowing portal. The blue light within the portal was similar to the light of the territory's teleportation portal. This must be the entrance to the mystic realm. However, the blue light of the secret realm's entrance was as turbulent as the sea. Sometimes, it would emit violent energy that fluctuated. Obviously, it hadn't completely stabilized yet. Near the meteorite belt, there were groups of evolvers in the east and west. They had been waiting for a long time. Most of these evolvers were at the middle level. There were also high-grade and low-grade evolvers, but they were in the minority. The reason for this situation was very simple. Low-grade evolvers generally wouldn't come to this kind of middle or high-grade secret realm. The high-grade evolvers also knew that they weren't allowed to enter when the entrance to the mystic realm had just stabilized. Mid-grade evolvers were the first batch of vanguard troops to enter the mystic realm. Naturally, they were the most numerous when the mystic realm hadn't opened yet. With Bai Xiaowen's insight, he quickly identified a few groups of people from the positions of these evolvers. They were the core focus of this area. The other groups of people in the vicinity were respectively led by these few groups. Obviously, these few groups of people were from powerful territories and were considered the most promising vanguard troops to explore the mystic realm. In addition to these few groups of main forces, there were also many individual evolvers who wanted to make a fortune by taking advantage of the situation. They were watching from afar. Their characteristics were that their positions weren't tight and their organizational relationships were very loose. There were also some individual evolvers with strong communication skills who were constantly chatting with the other evolvers nearby, wanting to form temporary groups. Bai Xiaowen, who had come alone, naturally became the target of some of the individual investors. Not long after, a tall and thin evolver with a pair of shrewd eyes approached him. Friend, you look a bit unfamiliar. My name is Zhang Fengbao, and I'm currently affiliated with the Falling Hammer leader. How should I address you? Bai Xiaowen nodded slightly and glanced at Zhang Fengbao. He found that he was a level 15 elite evolver. Bai Xiaowen used his spiritual power to change his voice and said with a slightly hoarse voice, "My name is Hei'er. Zhang Fengbao?" Fortunately, he reacted quickly. It's common for evolvers to use aliases, but this Mr. Hei'er's aliases are a bit funny. Fortunately, I've been professionally trained. No matter how funny things are, I'll never laugh. Zhang Fengbao thought silently. Is there a problem? Bai Xiaowen slightly tilted his head and looked at Zhang Fengbao. Naming things was the easiest. Changing the surname from Bai to Hei, ranking second. Wouldn't that be the case? Zhang Fengbao said, No problem, no problem. Brother Hei'er, I can't see your level, nor can I perceive your strength level. You're not a high-level evolver, right? What's your basic priority? As if afraid that Bai Xiaowen would misunderstand, Zhang Fengbao quickly added, Don't misunderstand, I'm just asking. I don't mean any harm. Bai Xiaowen nodded to show that he didn't mind and continued to fabricate, Well, I'm level 16. My priority level is 5, which is equivalent to an elite. Zhang Fengbao's eyes lit up, Brother Hei'er, you should also be a solo player, right? When we enter the secret territory, evolvers without groups like us should help each other. We can't fight among ourselves. Bai Xiaowen narrowed his eyes and said, After entering the secret territory, we should be separated by space dislocations, right? Is it useful for you to form a group now? Zhang Fengbao smiled bitterly, I'm just forming a good relationship and getting familiar with them. This way, when we meet in the secret territory, it'll be easier to discuss things, right? Bai Xiaowen suddenly felt bored and felt the sorrow of the weak. Actually, Zhang Fengbao wasn't considered weak. After all, he was an elite. However, now was the exploration of the secret territory of the universe. Only the top evolvers of the Star Alliance could be considered strong. Zhang Fengbao was undoubtedly the weak one. No matter what, he had to grow strong enough so that he wouldn't have to live so humbly and lowly. Zhang Fengbao didn't guess Bai Xiaowen's thoughts and chatted with Bai Xiaowen warmly. Bai Xiaowen said that this was his first time exploring the secret territory of the universe, so he asked some general questions about it. For example, what kind of place was the secret territory? Was it a main material plane or a plane similar to the spirit world? Or was it a subspace attached to the main material plane? Zhang Fengbao's answer also solved Bai Xiaowen's doubts. He smiled and said, Brother Hei'er, the secret territory is actually a planet. There are big and small secret territories, and high-level secret territories are even bigger than Earth. However, we don't know the coordinates of the planet and the secret territory, so we can only teleport there through the secret territory portal in front of us. Chapter 1605. Secret realms were planets. Bai Xiaowen finally understood that the so-called Wuya secret realm was not located in the Wuya region. The door to the secret realm that appeared in the meteorite circle in the Wuya region was only a springboard, or rather, the entrance to a transportation channel. Of course, considering the limited distance of the transportation channel, the exact location of the Wuya secret realm should not be too far away from the meteorite circle in the Wuya region. However, such an unknown planet would definitely exceed the scanning ability of the various lords. Therefore, even though the secret realms were planets, the various lords could only enter the secret realm through the door. There was no way to directly find the location of the secret realm planet. After the secret realm door opened this time, it would close in less than a month. He didn't know when the next time it would open again. However, Bai Xiaowen was a little puzzled. From the chat history of the Blue Star Lords group, the Starlink Lords had the ability to exploit the resources in secret realms for a long time. This was because the war between the Great Xia territory and the Gundor territory was over a spiritual crystal mine in a secret realm called the New Moon Realm. With the secret realm door closed all year round, how could they exploit the resources in the secret realm for a long time? Thinking of this problem, Bai Xiaowen asked directly. Zhang Fengbao said, It seems that Brother Hei'er really doesn't understand the secret realm planet. On a newly discovered secret realm planet, there would usually be multiple spiritual energy convergence points. Using the source of spiritual energy at these convergence points, they would be able to construct a two-way transportation channel between the lords and the lords. However, each convergence point can only open one channel, so for the lords, seizing the convergence points is the most important. Bai Xiaowen nodded and said in a hoarse voice, "This is a good thing. Us individual investors have no conflict with the lords." Zhang Fengbao shook his head and said, "Spirit convergence points usually have heaven and earth treasures growing there, and they are also guarded by powerful strange beasts and monsters. The profit from sweeping through a spirit convergence point is much greater than wandering aimlessly in the secret territory. So, this is unavoidable. Us individual traders also have to move closer to the spirit convergence point, or we won't be able to get much profit at all. We won't even be able to pay for the Lord's Gate." Bai Xiaowen nodded slightly, especially the high-level secret realms, which were larger than Earth. In such a vast area, it was harder to find spiritual treasures aimlessly than finding a needle in a haystack. The gathering point of spiritual power was equivalent to a treasure location, so he had to go there. Zhang Fengbao had been chatting with Bai Xiaowen for a long time, and he thought that he was already familiar with him. He laughed and said, "Brother, hey, I'll go find a few more evolvers and get to know them better. Do you want to join us? It's good to make more friends." Bai Xiaowen was about to shake his head when he suddenly felt a wave of spiritual power. One of the waves was actually one that he was more familiar with. It was Hansu. Zhang Fengbao also felt it. He looked over and said in surprise, "Hey, there are actually people fighting here." He immediately flew in the direction of the wave of spiritual power. It seemed that he was also an enthusiastic spectator. Bai Xiaowen thought to himself. He was also worried about Hansu and his other companions, so he immediately flew after him. Zhang Fengbao saw Bai Xiaowen following him and immediately laughed, showing an expression of kindred spirits. The two of them quickly flew closer and saw that dozens of evolvers had already gathered at the scene of the incident. In the middle of the starry sky surrounded by the crowd, two people were fighting. Only when they got closer could they hear the whistling sound of the collision of chi energy. Because sound needed a medium to transmit, they were far away before, so the sound of the fight could not be transmitted over. Now that they were close, the ripples of spiritual power from the two people's battle spread out and became the medium to transmit sound. Therefore, in the starry sky of the universe, the movements in the distance could not be heard. They could only be heard by sensing the fluctuations of spiritual power. Hansu's opponent was a young evolver with a thin figure and an Asian face. He was wearing a blue shirt. Every time he attacked, there were endless shadows of his fists. It was as if he had hundreds of thousands of arms that enveloped Hansu, making it impossible to judge whether he was real or fake. Hansu's expression was calm. He waved a steel shield, and a layer of golden light rippled on the surface of his body, blocking most of the threatening punches. The remaining few punches and kicks landed on the golden light on the surface of his body and could only cause ripples. For a short period of time, Hansu could still hold on. However, his opponent clearly did not use his full strength and seemed to be at ease. Bai Xiaowen narrowed his eyes and glanced at his opponent with the eye of evolution. The thin youth in blue was clearly a chi energy martial artist. He was level 15 and had a spiritual power value as high as 2,200 plus. The three attributes of his physical fitness, strength, agility, and physique, were all more than 90 points. He was an out-and-out mid-level evolver hero. Bai Xiaowen was slightly relieved when he saw that the two of them were not fighting for their lives. He compared his own attributes and evaluated the strength of the thin youth in blue. Bai Xiaowen, Lord level 13, race, humanoid/human, attributes, strength 79, agility 86, physique 86, spirit 119, spiritual power, 2,330, Grim Reaper's power, 10. It was important to note that Bai Xiaowen had already added the 10 free attribute points that he had saved up previously to agility. This was mainly to complement the Invisible Blade ultimate skill, which was a sneaky move. It could also be seen from this that evolvers' body tempering due to breakthroughs time and time again would tend to balance out the various attributes. Bai Xiaowen's physical fitness had originally been his weak point, but now all the three attributes related to physical fitness were catching up. For evolvers, attributes still had a very important position. Although the ability to unleash spiritual power was important, it also required attributes as a foundation. This youth in blue's physical fitness is slightly stronger than mine, but his spirit is far lower than mine. His spiritual power value is about 100 points lower than mine, but his combat specialization should be much higher than mine. It should be at least proficiency level 3. Overall, I definitely have the upper hand, but in terms of close combat strength, it should be a 50-50 chance. Old Han might not be a match for him. After all, Han Su was only level 13. Fortunately, Han Su's defensive specialization had just been trained to proficiency level 1. Relying on the defense of the steel shield, he could effectively reduce the damage of the opponent's attacks. Otherwise, he would have been defeated long ago. On the opposite side, there were a few evolvers with Asian faces who were pointing at the battle. They looked relaxed and seemed to be the companions of the youth in blue. One of them suddenly laughed and said, "Yuan Lin, how come you can't even take down a low-level evolver and waste so much time?" Hearing this ridicule, Yuan Lin also laughed and replied, "This tortoise's shell is quite hard. I'm just playing with him and testing his moves. Watch me break his tortoise shell." Suddenly, Yuan Lin threw out both his fists. The fist shadows that filled the sky suddenly condensed into one and transformed into a huge shining fist that heavily smashed onto Han Su's steel shield. With a buzzing sound, the steel shield shattered into pieces. 8. Chapter 1606. Han Su hurriedly retreated. Logically speaking, Yuan Lin had won since he broke his opponent's steel shield. This battle was not a life-and-death battle, so it was time to stop. However, Yuan Lin flew forward and threw out a series of punches. Someone said, "Yuan Lin, this is just a spar. Don't go too far. Leave some face for the White Phoenix Overlord." This was the reason why Bai Xiaowen did not appear with Han Su and the others. Han Su and the others had shown their faces during the counterattack on the Great Tang territory, so it was unlikely that they would hide their identities. They would definitely appear under the banner of the White Phoenix Overlord. If Bai Xiaowen was with them, no matter what he transformed into, people would definitely guess the true identity of the White Phoenix Overlord. If they met up after entering the Mystic Realm, they would be able to suppress the news of the White Phoenix Overlord's participation in this Mystic Realm exploration. Yuan Lin smiled. "Duani-chen, don't bother about me. This newbie held back against me. He's looking down on me." Han Su suddenly pulled out a second steel shield and blocked Yuan Lin's storm-like attacks. Yuan Lin was slightly taken aback. Then, he shouted again and the sky full of punches turned into a giant fist of light that struck out again. With a boom, the second steel shield Han Su had just pulled out shattered into pieces. However, Han Su borrowed the force of the impact to retreat the moment the shield broke and was not affected by the aftershock. After putting some distance between them, he pulled out a third steel shield. Yuan Lin, Duani-chen, the onlookers, Yuan Lin was a little unhappy. Although this blockhead in front of him was not strong, his defense was definitely good. He was able to block his flying shadow punch even with a white-grade steel shield. If he had a dark gold shield, wouldn't he really be helpless against him? Shaking off this thought, Yuan Lin shouted, "You're not done, are you? Let's see how you block this move." Dual flow. Yuan Lin exhaled and roared. Another giant fist of light blasted out. At the same time, a mirror seemed to appear in the void behind Han Su. Another giant fist of light extended from behind Han Su and blasted toward his back. The tyrannical pressure locked onto Han Su's figure, making his body sluggish and unable to dodge. Han Su's expression did not change. From his storage space, he took out the fourth steel shield. With one shield in each hand, he blocked the two heavy punches coming from the front and back. With two loud bangs, the two steel shields shattered once again. Yuan Lin did not expect Han Su to have so many white-grade shields on him. It seemed like he was determined to use quantity to make up for quality. Seeing that Han Su had taken out his fifth shield, Yuan Lin suppressed his desire to complain and attacked again with a dark expression. This time, Yuan Lin didn't use the dual-style fist technique. Instead, he simply used a heavy punch. Yuan Lin was determined to shatter all of his opponent's steel shields. But this time, there was a change. Han Su, who had been focusing on defense and not attacking, suddenly puffed out his chest and straightened his back. A layer of golden light rippled from his body. Vajra incantation. A 5-foot-tall golden figure appeared behind him. Han Su clenched the steel shield with both hands and fiercely swung it at Yuan Lin's fist. At the same time, the surface of the steel shield was suddenly covered with a layer of golden light, forming a golden light shield the size of a door. Boom! A shockwave exploded. Yuan Lin's arm felt sore and numb. He felt that something was wrong. The power of Han Su's attack was definitely beyond his normal level of earth energy. At the moment of contact, Yuan Lin could even feel that his opponent's shield attack contained a dense counterattack force. This kind of force was similar to Yuan Lin's flying shadow punch. It was precisely because of this dense counterattack force that Han Su, who was at a lower level, was able to defeat Yuan Lin for the first time and make him suffer a small loss. What kind of skill is this? The surrounding evolvers were a little surprised. It seemed that Han Su's move was similar to the shield bash skill that he had learned in the world of the Awakened Ones. It was just that he had used earth energy to perform it. Logically speaking, it shouldn't be so powerful. Although the skills of the Awakened Ones could be performed by infusing spiritual energy and had the same effect on evolvers, generally speaking, they were definitely not as powerful as the skills of the evolved ones. Take a 3-star skill as an example. What kind of 3-star skills were the skills of the Awakened Ones? Earth-shattering bash, shadowless slash, life heal. However, the 3rd stage skills of the evolved ones were very impressive. Just a Taoist transformation technique alone could throw out a simple skill like earth-shattering bash, let alone a Taoist technique like palm thunder. Therefore, Han Su's use of shield bash to defeat Yuan Lin was naturally puzzling. However, Bai Xiaowen knew Han Su's background. This was a passive skill that he had learned from the classics of his profession. While defending against the opponent's attack, he could continuously store a trace of the opponent's attack force and then gather it together to explode in the next attack. In other words, Han Su could only be powerful once after being beaten for so long. Bai Xiaowen had always thought that this kind of skill, which had such a long foreplay and short eruption time, would wither after the eruption, was rather silly. But now, it seemed that the actual combat effect was quite good. It was mainly suitable for Han Su's defensive counterattack tactics. Yuan Lin was pushed back more than 10 meters before he managed to stop himself. He frowned and looked at Han Su, who had a calm expression on his face. He was somewhat embarrassed. As expected, you were hiding something. Again. Yuan Lin shouted in a deep voice. A dazzling light rose from the surface of his body, and his earth energy fluctuated violently. It was obvious that he was going to use his full strength. Take this, Flying Shadow Rising Dragon Lord. Along with the name of the embarrassing move, Yuan Lin bellowed and punched. Countless fist shadows gathered into a lifelike Gangqi dragon, roaring as it rolled toward Han Su. Bai Xiaowen narrowed his eyes. This Flying Shadow Rising Dragon Lord was Yuan Lin's true strength. Han Su would definitely not be able to withstand it. However, Bai Xiaowen did not make a move. Because Li Shi had made a move. With a clear clang, Li Shi stabbed out with his sword. It looked like a single stab, but it was actually countless quick swords. Countless tiny sword chi streaked through the air like beautiful flowers and quickly gathered to form a huge sword chi that pierced toward Yuan Lin. Li Shi did not choose to fight Yuan Lin head-on. Instead, he chose to attack Wei to rescue Zhao. Of course, this was a smart move. Yuan Lin had no choice but to withdraw his fist. The earth energy dragon quickly turned back to protect himself, but its power was reduced by at least 30%. However, this was no different from a sneak attack. In the eyes of some people, Yuan Lin was no longer rescuing the situation. After all, in the eyes of ordinary people, Li Shi should have used his ultimate move to block Yuan Lin's flying shadow rising dragon lord instead of attacking Yuan Lin directly. The sword qi and earth energy collided, and intense spiritual energy fluctuations spread out. Both sides were actually evenly matched in this exchange of blows. Yuan Lin glared at Li Shi, Han Su, who quickly raised his shield and stood shoulder to shoulder with Li Shi. Behind them, Qiao Rui and Cecilia, who quietly gathered their spiritual energy fluctuations and were ready to attack. Yuan Lin did not continue to attack. He had already calmed down. Chapter 1607. Yuan Lin wasn't an idiot. The four heroes from the White Phoenix territory were clearly very united. The warrior with the shield had very strong defense. In the hasty clash just now, Yuan Lin also understood that the ponytailed girl with the longsword wasn't to be underestimated. There were also two unknown girls behind her. One was level 13, and the other was level 14. They were probably on par with the warrior and the longsword girl. His companions behind him didn't have any intention of helping him. If they continued fighting, he would definitely be at a disadvantage. Although he wasn't going to continue fighting, Yuan Lin still mocked. Are these the evolvers from the White Phoenix territory? Their strength is SOSO, but they don't follow the rules. Li Shi snorted. You're a middle-aged man and a mid-level evolver. You've been cultivating longer than us. What kind of man are you to bully others with your level? Laughter came from behind him, and the veins on Yuan Lin's forehead popped. Yuan Lin was indeed 30 years old, but evolvers had a long time at their peak. He still looked like a young man, so he couldn't stand being called a middle-aged man by Li Shi. However, Yuan Lin could also see that the people in front of him, other than the Western girl, were all around 20 years old. A young man standing behind Yuan Lin laughed and said, Yuan Lin, they're right. You've cultivated for 10 years more than them. You can spar, but there's no need to be heavy-handed. Yuan Lin's face darkened. Duanichen, whose side are you on? The young man named Duanichen shrugged with a smile. Yuan Lin carefully stared at Han Su and Li Shi, then waved his hand and left. Seeing that there would be no more fighting, the other onlookers also dispersed. Duanichen came over with a smile and found Li Shi and Qiao Rui. Hello, I'm Duanichen, an evolver from the Red Cloud territory. How do I address you beauties? Li Shi was slightly on guard, but Qiao Rui's expression was calm. She said generously, we are all evolvers from the White Phoenix territory. You should know this. She then reported the names of her companions. Of course, Qiao Rui used the pseudonyms everyone had when they were in the Three Kingdoms. For example, Han Su used the pseudonym Han Yang, Li Shi used the pseudonym Li Shu, and Cecilia used the pseudonym Bai San Yang. However, Qiao Rui reported her real name. She did the same when she explored the spirit realm. Duanichen chatted with the people from White Phoenix territory for a while, looking very friendly. Bai Xiaowen was also eavesdropping with his psychic sense. His spirit was as high as 119 points, and his priority was high, so his eavesdropping ability was very strong. Even if a hero class of the same level used psychic voice transmissions, Bai Xiaowen could intercept them. He learned from Duanichen that Yuan Lin was a genius evolver from the Heavenly Province territory. Yuan Lin, Duanichen, and their companions were all mid-level evolvers from the Pan-Asian Alliance. This group of people was one of the main forces that Bai Xiaowen had noticed from the beginning. Li Shi was still somewhat on guard against Duanichen, so he didn't talk much. However, Qiao Rui responded appropriately. While dealing with Duanichen's spying, she also learned a lot of information about the Pan-Asian Alliance. This time, several important territories of the Pan-Asian Alliance had sent people over. The ones who came now were just the vanguard. Later, when the energy intensity of the Secret Realms portal increased to a high level, the high-level powerhouses of the Heavenly Province territory and the Red Cloud territory, and even the lords, would come over. Bai Xiaowen narrowed his eyes. Yuan Lin was from the Heavenly Province territory, so it was no wonder he was slightly hostile towards the evolvers of the White Phoenix territory. It was probably because the lore of the Heavenly Province, Mengchuan, was hostile towards the White Phoenix territory. However, judging from Duanichen's attitude towards Yuan Lin, even though they were all evolvers of the Pan-Asian Alliance, their relationship wasn't solid. There was still competition between them. After all, they came from different territories. If they both took a fancy to a place where spirit energy converged, Yuan Lin and Duanichen would definitely fight over it. This would lay a good foundation for the lords of their respective territories to build a teleportation formation. Not long after, Duanichen politely bid farewell and rejoined Yuan Lin and his companions from the Pan-Asian Alliance. Bai Xiaowen inched closer and extended his consciousness to continue eavesdropping. These people were clearly using spirit energy to communicate with each other to prevent others from hearing them. However, Bai Xiaowen could still intercept their communication, except for one of the young evolvers. Bai Xiaowen couldn't help but glance at the young evolver. He was dressed in black and had an ordinary appearance. He didn't have much of a presence in Yuan Lin's group. However, only he could prevent Bai Xiaowen from eavesdropping. There had to be something wrong here. Just as Bai Xiaowen was about to use the active scanning mode of the Eye of Evolution, the young man suddenly looked over as if he had sensed something. Bai Xiaowen quickly looked away, but he was secretly surprised by the other party's keen senses. In any case, he could obtain a lot of information by eavesdropping on other people's conversations with his consciousness. It wouldn't be good if he forcefully saw through this person's strength and became a target. This was what Bai Xiaowen thought. Yuan Lin said, "Duanichen, Zhang Cheng, why didn't you help? You were the ones who instigated me to start a fight." Duanichen shook his head and said, "This is a public place. There are many eyes. Can you kill someone in public? If we help you, at most, we'll let you vent your anger and save you some face." Yuan Lin said, "Isn't face important? If I fight with an outsider, I represent Pan-Asia's face." Another young man said, "You can fight, but there's no need. Instead, it will alert the other party." Duanichen smiled and said, "In any case, our goal is to test the strength of the evolvers of the White Phoenix region. Now, our goal has been achieved. After entering the secret realm, you can do whatever you want. If we can help, we definitely won't stand by and do nothing." Yuan Lin said in a muffled voice, "The secret realm is so big. How can it be so easy to run into one? I'm afraid I won't be able to regain my face." Then, there was a burst of laughter. Bai Xiaowen narrowed his eyes and thought. Duanichen looked kind on the surface, but he secretly instigated Yuan Lin to fight in the secret realm. He really had sinister intentions. However, the conversation between these people made one thing clear to Bai Xiaowen. Killing was not taboo in the secret realm. Outside the secret realm, in public, there were certain scruples. This was within reason. You want to kill my companions? After entering the secret realm, don't blame me for being ruthless. Bai Xiaowen thought silently. Of course, even if killing was not taboo in the secret realm, Bai Xiaowen still had to do it when no one was around. Otherwise, if word got out, it would give the other territories an excuse to start a war. Outside the meteorite circle in the Wuya region, these evolvers waited for a full 10 days. Clearly, the opening of the Wuya region's secret realm was later than expected. But the 10 days of waiting were worth it. At the entrance of the Wuya region's secret realm, the spirit energy fluctuations finally stabilized and turned into a portal that rippled with light blue light. Chapter 1608. The secret territory has finally opened. Quick! Groups of evolvers finished their cross-legged cultivation and got up from the meteorites. They flew towards the secret territory's entrance and disappeared into the light blue door. On a medium-sized meteorite, Bai Xiaowen opened his eyes. He saw that his 4 companions had already entered the light door. It's time to go in. From now on, there will be about 10 days to a month. It will be the golden time for me to explore the secret territory. Bai Xiaowen was a Lord Tier Evolver and half a King Tier Evolver. Although he was only a low tier evolver, in terms of strength, it was hard to find a match for him even among mid-tier evolvers. Bai Xiaowen was also a Lord Tier evolver. Although he did not have a suitable psychic source of spiritual power, and was temporarily unable to summon an army from his territory, he still had the potential to do so. It was important to know that there were spiritual sources in the secret territory. As long as he could find one or two and summon 105 element flag warriors, Bai Xiaowen would be able to do whatever he wanted. Lastly, there was the powerful skill, Dark Resurrection. After Bai Xiaowen killed Sheiji in the Shaoxing Plain, he had wanted to find an opportunity to bury Sheiji's corpse. However, due to various reasons, he did not do so. Later on, Bai Xiaowen understood that a Lord Tier evolver like Sheiji was very rare. She was an excellent target for Dark Resurrection. However, Bai Xiaowen's current 2,300 spiritual energy points did not meet the requirements for Dark Resurrection for the time being. Sheiji was a level 15 Lord Tier evolver with 2,600 spiritual energy points. Dark Resurrection required Bai Xiaowen's spiritual energy points to be higher than the target in order to forcefully resurrect her. Otherwise, the deceased had to be willing. Sheiji, who had a deep grudge, would not willingly become Bai Xiaowen's hatchet man. Bai Xiaowen's Taigong's Art of War already had the content of the middle chapter. Next, as long as he practiced step by step, he would be able to reach the beginner level and reach level 14. At that time, Bai Xiaowen's spiritual energy would increase by at least 330 points, and he would meet the requirements to resurrect the Snake Bell. He would obtain a powerful combat power equivalent to a level 15 Lord, and his various combat specializations and combat skills would be quite mature. Before the energy intensity of the entrance to the secret plane was raised to a high level, which meant that the high-level evolvers and veteran lords of the Star Alliance were unable to enter the secret plane, Bai Xiaowen was one of the top few people in the secret plane and could maximize the benefits. Bai Xiaowen flew towards the entrance of the secret realm and disappeared into it. The feeling of weightlessness from traveling through space disappeared. Bai Xiaowen's body suddenly sank, and then he felt a burning pain and discomfort spread throughout his body. This kind of tingling sensation was relatively weak. It was like a caterpillar crawling over his body. It was itchy and painful. This feeling is sunlight? Bai Xiaowen suddenly looked up. What a big sun! The sun in the sky was more than twice the diameter of the sun that Bai Xiaowen had seen on Earth. He did not know if it was because of its large size or because it was too close to the secret plane planet. There was a slight tingling sensation all over his body, probably because his body was not used to the strong direct sunlight. The ultraviolet rays must have exceeded the limit, but it won't affect me much. Bai Xiaowen muttered and began to adapt to the planet's gravity. Evolvers were quite sensitive to their own weight. Bai Xiaowen moved his arms and legs and quickly confirmed that the planet's gravity was about twice that of Earth. As for the air, Bai Xiaowen had no interest in trying to breathe externally. After all, as an evolver, he could circulate the circulatory cycle in his body to breathe internally. This is definitely not Earth, or even the solar system. Bai Xiaowen observed the situation around him and thought to himself. There were towering trees all around him, and from the leaves, they looked a bit like some kind of giant fern. The ground was covered with a thick carpet of humus due to the fallen leaves. It was obvious that this was a planet with life. The concentration of spiritual energy was also quite high, even higher than that of the White Phoenix territory. A rustling sound came from the ground. Bai Xiaowen looked down and saw that it was a fleshy bug that was crawling quickly. However, the size of this insect was a little shocking. It was as big as a toy poodle on Earth. Before Bai Xiaowen could exclaim in surprise, a scorpion the size of an adult swaggered past. Its tail was raised high and shone with a faint blue light. Screech! A soul-shaking howl came from afar. Bai Xiaowen raised his head and looked at the sky through the gaps of the towering trees. He saw a huge flying creature the size of a commercial airliner gliding past. This is the dinosaur planet? Although it was just a glimpse, the flying creature he saw was indeed very similar to the pterosaur that once existed on Earth. Bai Xiaowen sighed softly. If this was the dinosaur planet, the arcane realm was not considered dangerous. Evolvers with spiritual energy could deal with this kind of clumsy monster that only had a big body. Just as he finished thinking, Bai Xiaowen suddenly felt a threat. His figure leaped rapidly, grabbed a vine, and swung onto the opposite branch. With a whoosh, a gray shadow quickly swept past the branch Bai Xiaowen was on. The thick branch was directly cut off, and the cross-section was as smooth as a mirror. What kind of monster can escape my spiritual sense? Although he did not actively open his spiritual sense to scan, Bai Xiaowen's spiritual sense was still working passively. He did not expect to be discovered by a monster after it got close to him. Hiss, the monster's attack missed and it fell to the ground. It raised its head to look at Bai Xiaowen, who was on the tree branch. It opened its mouth, which was filled with broken teeth, and issued a warning. Deinonychus? Bai Xiaowen frowned and scanned the dinosaur with his eye of evolution. Deinonychus, Elite Level 17, Race, Ancient Dragon/Flying Dragon Race, Attributes, Strength 100, Agility 150, Vitality 90, Spirit 55, Spiritual Energy Value, 2,400. This Deinonychus was over 3 meters long and nearly 2 meters tall when standing upright. It was even bigger than the Wrath Claw, and its skin was shiny. What surprised Bai Xiaowen the most was that this Deinonychus also had a spiritual energy value, and it was quite high. With his Eye of Evolution's active scan, he could see that the Deinonychus's meridians were quite wide and tough. They were much stronger than those of ordinary evolvers. This was probably the reason why its spiritual energy was so strong. Its incomparably strong body and wide meridians gave it a stronger spiritual energy. After the Deinonychus hissed twice, its body quickly became transparent. Spiritual energy covered its body and it disappeared. However, this time, Bai Xiaowen took the initiative to scan with his spiritual sense. Relying on the advantage of having a higher priority, he was able to catch the Deinonychus. Within his field of vision, the Deinonychus' blurry figure circled around, preparing to launch a second surprise attack from behind Bai Xiaowen. Chapter 1609. Bai Xiaowen secretly exclaimed in admiration at the intelligence of this beast. It actually knew how to use battle tactics. It seems that the Deinonychus is not a beast species. Instead, it is an ancient dragon species. Bai Xiaowen's mind was filled with the images of dragons in the Western fantasy world. They were huge winged lizards. In terms of body size, if one were to disregard the wings, they were indeed similar to dinosaurs. Could it be that the Western dragons evolved from dinosaurs? Although his mind was filled with such thoughts, it did not affect Bai Xiaowen's battle. In terms of battle tactics, how could he lose to a Deinonychus? Bai Xiaowen deliberately did not turn around, pretending that he did not notice the Deinonychus's movements. When the Deinonychus leapt up a second time and swung its sharp claws at Bai Xiaowen lightly stomped on the tree branch under his feet, causing his body to rapidly descend. In this way, the Deinonychus's leap once again missed its target and swept over Bai Xiaowen's head. Formless Edge. Bai Xiaowen raised his right palm to the sky. The formless edge suddenly erupted with light, extending over 3 meters. He planned to borrow the momentum of the Deinonychus's charge to open its stomach. With a ripping sound, a bitter wound appeared on the Deinonychus's abdomen, causing blood to spurt out. It once again landed on the ground, revealing its body. Its pair of blood-red eyes stared fiercely at Bai Xiaowen. It actually did not die. Bai Xiaowen was somewhat surprised. This Deinonychus's skin was a bit too thick. When the formless edge cut through its abdomen, it felt as though it was cutting through cowhide. There was a clear sluggish feeling. Moreover, there was a type of energy similar to battle chi protecting its body. If not for the formless edge's ability to cut through protective spiritual energy and Bai Xiaowen's tyrannical elemental energy, he might not have been able to cause any damage to the Deinonychus. Bai Xiaowen straightened his back and automatically cancelled his transformation technique, returning to his original appearance. I did not expect that I would have to go all out against an elite Deinonychus. Bai Xiaowen had already completely retracted his contempt for the Deinonychus. After all, this was a high-level secret realm, and they, as intermediate evolvers, were only the vanguard who had come to serve as the vanguard. The monsters they faced were comparable to high-level evolvers. For example, this Deinonychus was level 17. It was 4 levels higher than Bai Xiaowen. It was 2 whole stages higher. Even if they were only elites, they could not be underestimated. Bai Xiaowen crooked his finger to launch a lightning strike. This was just a simplified version of the thunder technique, so the consumption of true elemental energy was relatively small. The Deinonychus roared again and again, constantly jumping to avoid the lightning strikes. It was clearly somewhat afraid of this glaring lightning energy. After a few lightning strikes, Bai Xiaowen raised his hand and cast a quagmire spell, delaying the Deinonychus movements. He then flew forward and took the initiative to attack. However, the claws of the Deinonychus had an additional layer of dense energy, allowing it to tread on the swamp as though it was flat ground. This kind of low-level Dao technique was indeed not very useful against high-level creatures. Like a train, the Deinonychus rammed into Bai Xiaowen. Swoosh! A tree vine suddenly rose from the ground and tripped one of the Deinonychus' hind legs. One end of the tree vine was tied to a big tree, while the other end was held by Kits. When Bai Xiaowen used the thunder technique to disturb the Deinonychus, he had already secretly summoned Kits to prepare this kind of tripping rope. In his view, the Deinonychus was not a human, so it was lacking in intelligence. As expected, this tripping rope worked. This time, the Deinonychus lost its aim midway and flew forward due to inertia. What awaited it was Bai Xiaowen's second invisible blade. This time, Bai Xiaowen chose the abdomen, which was the place where the Deinonychus had been injured before. Without the protection of its skin, the invisible blade was deeply embedded in its abdomen. Bai Xiaowen forcefully twisted and flew back, avoiding the vengeful claws of the Deinonychus. This attack could be considered to have seriously injured the Deinonychus. It was lying on the ground with blood continuously flowing out. Although it was not dead, it had already lost its ability to fight. Bai Xiaowen snapped his fingers. The plan worked. Kits, are you alright? Io. Kits groaned as he squeezed out from the trunk of a big tree. Although the tripping rope he pulled just now had successfully made the Deinonychus lose its balance and fall down, the impact of the Deinonychus running was quite strong. Kits was sent flying by the force of the impact, embedding himself into the trunk of a large tree, leaving behind a tie-shaped dent. Fortunately, the tree vines of this primitive forest were not ordinary vines. They were quite sturdy, and before they broke, they had successfully tripped the Deinonychus. Boss, in the future, can you not let me do this kind of dangerous work? You can change it to the Butcher or the Death Knight. They are all bigger than me. Kits rambled on and on. Bai Xiaowen waved his hand and summoned the undead archers. They shot at the vital points of the Deinonychus from afar, slowly and steadily grinding away the remaining health points of the opponent. At the same time, they trained the undead archer's shooting ability. As for Bai Xiaowen himself, he took the opportunity to recover a small portion of his true inner force. On the dinosaur planet where danger lurked everywhere, it was necessary to maintain one's perfect condition. It was worth mentioning that the undead archer's arrows only left a white mark when they landed on the skin of the Deinonychus. They were unable to reduce the health points of the Deinonychus at all. The only things that could cause damage were the wounds on the Deinonychus' abdomen, as well as the eyes, nose, and other vital points that were not protected by the skin. Kits couldn't help but mutter, "This skin is too hard." Only after the health points of the Deinonychus had been wiped clean and it was completely dead did Kits dare to step forward and use a small knife to deal with the corpse. "Boss, I got 2 materials. They seem to be pretty good. Can you take a look?" Kits presented his treasures. There were a total of 9 sharp spikes, all of which were the sharpest claws of the Deinonychus. Each spike was about 50 centimeters long, like a sharp sickle, flashing with a cold light that made one's heart palpitate. In addition, there was a piece of skin that was mostly intact. It had been peeled off from the Deinonychus body. Bai Xiaowen used the Eye of Evolution to scan it. This was equivalent to an appraisal process. The spirit world's laws prompted information. You've obtained the Deinonychus sharp claws. You've obtained the Deinonychus skin. The sharp claws were of level 8 gold quality, while the skin was of level 8 blue quality. Both were considered forging materials. In the world of evolvers, killing humanoid monsters could give them finished equipment. But killing non-humanoid monsters like the Deinonychus could only be done by gathering materials and handing them over to professionals to forge equipment. Dig out the Deinonychus heart. Bai Xiaowen indicated to Kits. He had used the Eye of Evolution to see that the Deinonychus heart was also a gold quality material. Moreover, it was a medicinal ingredient. Apart from that, the flesh and blood of the Deinonychus corpse had no value. Bai Xiaowen summoned the butcher and swallowed the Deinonychus flesh and blood. Chapter 1610. Bai Xiaowen raised his head and looked at the sky through the gaps in the leaves. He muttered to himself, I have to find the convergence point of spiritual energy on this planet. Time is limited. Finding the convergence point as soon as possible and reaping the benefits is the most important thing. Kits said, Boss is wise. How do we find it? Bai Xiaowen said, normally speaking, it's through perception. If I sense an area with abnormal spiritual energy, it's very likely that there will be a convergence point. However, the range of my spiritual sense is limited to a few dozen kilometers. This planet is even larger than Earth. Relying on luck like this won't be very likely to find it. Kit scratched his head. Then how do we find the others? We can't just rely on luck, right? Bai Xiaowen said, evolvers from old territories should have accumulated some special methods, such as practical tools and the like. Unfortunately, the White Phoenix territory doesn't have such good stuff. After pausing for a moment, Bai Xiaowen said, fortunately, in the ancient records of my profession, there's the ability to survey the direction of Earth veins. I can follow the direction of the Earth veins and observe the convergence point of nearby Earth veins. This is much better than blindly searching. Kits clapped his hands. That's right. Boss, do you need flying services? I can take you flying. It's more efficient to survey the landscape this way. I can already fly, although this planet's gravity was twice as high as Earth's and flying consumed extra spiritual energy, it was still possible to fly. It should be mentioned here that flying in the starry sky and flying on the surface of a planet were two different things. In the universe, there was basically no influence from the planet's gravity. Evolvers didn't need to use much spiritual power to maintain a floating posture. They only needed to use spiritual power to change directions, pause, and accelerate during flight, so the consumption was very small. Flying on the surface of a planet, not only did one have to resist the planet's gravity, there was also air resistance and a series of other interference factors. The consumption was much greater than in the starry sky. Thus, for the majority of evolvers, when exploring the surface of a planet, they would only fly if there were special circumstances. At other times, they would do their best to walk and conserve spiritual energy. Similarly, although aerial combat was also possible, for evolvers, when it came to ground combat was still the best choice. Bai Xiaowen didn't plan to fly this time, although it was very convenient. Flying in an unknown dinosaur planet, without the cover of the forest, the possibility of being exposed would increase exponentially. One had to know that this dinosaur planet had large flying dinosaurs, and the toothless pterosaur that he caught a glimpse of was one of them. This was especially true in a high-tiered secret land. The monsters here were basically level 17 and above. Even if they were slightly weaker, they would still be very difficult to deal with. Even an elite Deinonychus was harder to deal with than Bai Xiaowen had imagined. There was no need to mention how formidable those Commander Deinonychus were. If he were to be targeted by a pterosaur, even if he could kill it, he would inevitably have to expend quite a bit of effort and waste even more time. Bai Xiaowen chose to go on foot and looked for a higher mountain to observe. Are you full? Woo-woo, Bai Xiaowen looked at the butcher. The latter's stomach had been modified, so he would never know what it meant to be full. After devouring a 3-meter-long Deinonychus, the fatty was still unsatisfied. He grabbed a thigh bone and licked it incessantly. Kit suddenly said, "Boss, the fatty seems to have changed a bit. Is it because he ate the flesh of a high-tiered monster?" Bai Xiaowen also noticed that the butcher's skin was now shining with an oily sheen. His originally bloated body had actually swelled up a bit, like an inflated doll. Using the Eye of Evolution to scan, Bai Xiaowen could see the internal changes in the butcher's body. The speed at which the butcher's stomach digested the dinosaur's flesh could be said to be terrifying, constantly providing nutrients to the body. The density of his bones and muscles were all increasing bit by bit. Of course, this increase was at a speed that was difficult to discern with the naked eye. If not for the fact that Bai Xiaowen's Eye of Evolution had gone through 2 evolutions, it would probably be difficult to discern the extent of the increase. "Throw away the thigh bone. You can't chew it anyway." Bai Xiaowen was a bit disdainful. "After we collect the materials from the dinosaurs killed in this expedition, you can eat all of the corpses." The fatty's ugly face immediately revealed a happy smile, and he obediently threw away the thigh bone. His mouth made a few sounds, and he allowed Bai Xiaowen to take it back. "Kits, I won't call you back. Follow me," Bai Xiaowen said. When exploring alone, there were many times when he had to be distracted by other things. He couldn't always be fully focused on scanning and being on guard. Under certain circumstances, it was no problem for Kits to act as a lookout. Kits gave a nondescript military salute. "Yes, boss." Bai Xiaowen circulated his true inner force under his feet, and he leapt between the trees. His speed was extremely fast, a bit like a ninja from a certain anime. A pair of bat wings appeared on Kit's back, and he lightly flapped them to follow. Of course, he also flew at a low altitude within the range of the tree canopy, so as to avoid exposing himself to the vision of those aerial predators. At the peak of a mountain, Bai Xiaowen overlooked the earth beneath his feet. "I've chosen a total of 3 survey points. The trend of the ley lines here hasn't been damaged by people, so it's not hard to observe." Bai Xiaowen slightly closed his eyes, and the 3 overlooking scenes overlapped in his mind. The 3 ley lines are like 3 earth dragons, intertwined. The place where the earth dragons intersect is the area where the ley lines intersect. In the map in Bai Xiaowen's mind, there were 3 points that he had specially marked out. They were the areas where the 3 ley lines intersected. It was worth mentioning that during this period of walking and exploration, they hadn't encountered any other evolvers. This was very normal. A total of several hundred evolvers exploring the Black-Toothed secret territory had been transported to this planet that was even bigger than Earth by spatial dislocations. It was like a drop of oil falling into the sea, and not even a splash of oil could be seen. Evolvers would only have the possibility of encountering each other at the converging points of spiritual energy. After all, every evolver was using all kinds of methods to find the converging points of spiritual energy. This way, it would be very difficult for his 4 teammates to find the converging points of spiritual energy, but this was also good. The 4 of them had been separated by spatial dislocations, and in a situation where they weren't together, their individual battle strength was still somewhat lacking. It would be better to stay on this dinosaur planet and hunt some dinosaurs to hone their battle specializations and skills. It wouldn't be so dangerous if they didn't fight with other evolvers. Bai Xiaowen composed himself, and called Kits to prepare to leave. "Boss! Look down, look over there." Kits suddenly pointed at the cliff below them. Bai Xiaowen lowered his head to look. In the middle of the cliff between the lingering clouds, he could faintly see a protruding stone platform, which looked like a nest. Chapter 1611. It's most likely a pterosaur's lair. Bai Xiaowen made his judgment. It has some exploration value, but I can't be sure if that pterosaur is there or not. Kits laughed mischievously. "Boss, when you were calculating with your eyes closed, I saw a pterosaur take off from the platform and fly in that direction, very, very far away." Bai Xiaowen narrowed his eyes, his heart stirring slightly. In other words, the pterosaur's lair is very likely unguarded. Let's go take a look." Alrighty. Kit's had long since been bored out of his mind. The bat wings on his back suddenly flapped, and he swooped down, landing directly on the protruding stone platform. Bai Xiaowen once again summoned Delifa to protect him. He closed his eyes slightly, sharing Kit's vision. Kit's landed on the stone platform. In front of him was a cave. This cave was very spacious, over 5 meters high. If it wasn't such a large cave, it probably wouldn't have been able to accommodate such a large fellow as the pterosaur coming in and out. Kit's tiptoed into the cave, at the same time restraining his own spiritual energy fluctuations. After all, he was a vampire who had trained in the Blood God Sutra when he was an awakened. His innate talent in controlling energy was even higher. When he restrained his spiritual energy, he could deceive the senses of many leaders. The cave wasn't deep, and Kit's quickly saw the end of the cave. Bai Xiaowen couldn't help but be slightly surprised. In Kit's field of vision, he could see piles of sparkling crystals, with powerful fluctuations of spiritual energy. And under the illumination of the crystals, he could see even more precious mineral materials, most of them flickering with a golden luster. However, what shocked Bai Xiaowen was that, at the side of the crystals and mineral materials, there was a huge monster lying on the ground, a sleeping pterosaur. There was actually another one. Could it be that pterosaurs were also in pairs? Also, these crystals of spiritual energy were fine. He reckoned that the energy aura within was also beneficial to the pterosaur, but what was the use of so many adamantine minerals? Could it be that dinosaurs were the same as Western dragons, lacking resistance to these sparkling things? Bai Xiaowen felt that he had found the truth. After all, dinosaurs were also existences with considerable intelligence. Thinking about it, they weren't classified as wild beasts, but as ancient dragons. Furthermore, the Deinonychus he just killed was actually capable of using tactical sneak attacks. This was also a small piece of evidence. It seemed quite normal for intelligent dinosaurs to like beautiful gadgets. "Boss, are we going to do it or not?" Kit sent a question through the mental link. Only summon creatures like Kits, Delifa, or Wrathclaw that had relatively high intelligence could use the mental link to communicate with Bai Xiaowen. The other summoned creatures had too low intelligence. Bai Xiaowen thought for a moment. "Get ready." "Alright, I promise I won't disturb this big guy." Kits crouched down, preparing to crawl forward. "Wait for me." Bai Xiaowen called out to Keats. Then, using his true inner force, he slowly landed on the stone platform and stepped into the cave. "Hiss. Boss, why are you doing this yourself?" Kits was a bit puzzled. "You keep watch while I do the work. Isn't that good? Petty thieves are useless. If we don't prepare for battle, won't it be troublesome if we wake it up?" Bai Xiaowen shook his head slightly. "Get out of the way. While this big guy is still sleeping, we'll get rid of it together." Kits obediently got out of the way. At the same time, he gave a thumbs up, thinking that his boss was indeed ruthless. Bai Xiaowen's ability to restrain spiritual energy fluctuations was only better than Kit's. He arrived in front of the sleeping pterosaur and scanned it with the Eye of Evolution. Toothless pterosaur, boss level 17, race, ancient dragon/flying dragon, attributes, strength 103, agility 205, constitution 100, spirit 64, health 100%, spiritual energy 30/80ths. The pterosaur's vital part, where the spiritual energy was concentrated, was actually on the pterosaur's claws. This made Bai Xiaowen feel a bit surprised. Should he attack the pterosaur's claws, where the spiritual energy was concentrated, or should he attack the theoretically vital part of the head? Bai Xiaowen narrowed his eyes, looking at the pterosaur's obviously thick skull and sharp beak that was more than a meter long. He shook his head slightly. He was still willing to believe in the Eye of Evolution, and the pterosaur's head was obviously not something that could be split open so easily. Even if the pterosaur only had 100 points of constitution, it had powerful spiritual energy passively protecting its body. There was no way he could kill it in one hit. At this time, the pterosaur's huge body moved, as if it was about to wake up. Bai Xiaowen's eyes focused, and without hesitation, he flashed out invisible blade. With a stride, he rushed forward 7 or 8 meters, an invisible blade slashed horizontally at the pterosaur's claws. Rip! Once again, there was the difficult feeling of cutting through old cowhide. The pterosaur's skin was even thicker than that of a Deinonychus. Fortunately, Bai Xiaowen had made ample preparations this time, and had stored up power for a long time. He forcibly pierced through the pterosaur's skin, an invisible blade vibrated at high speed, stirring up the spiritual energy meridians under the pterosaur's skin into a mess. Of course, old cowhide was only an analogy that Bai Xiaowen could think of. In reality, the pterosaur's skin was 100 times tougher than that of an old cowhide. For example, Han Su's defense was strong enough, as hard as steel. In reality, when Han Su was at the awakened stage, his defense had already surpassed steel in the ordinary sense. Screech! With a shrill howl, the pterosaur's broad fleshy wings abruptly pushed forward. Instantly, an irresistible gust of strong wind appeared, blowing Bai Xiaowen and Keats several zhang away, out of the cave. This was the pterosaur's instinctive action. It was already in so much pain that it was going crazy. Thump, thump, thump. Like the sound of a drum, the cliff walls seemed to tremble, and earth, stone, and gravel rustled down, falling into the deep valley below. "It's ramming into the wall?" Kit said, flapping his wings. Bai Xiaowen naturally also saw it. He was secretly glad that he hadn't attacked the head. The pterosaur's head was indeed hard enough. It was madly ramming its head against the cave walls, smashing cracks. Through the eye of evolution, he could see that the pterosaur's health had been reduced by 30% by the attack just now, and it was still falling bit by bit. Bai Xiaowen naturally could see the reason why the health value continued to fall. It wasn't because of any bleeding damage. The little bit of blood from cutting off the pterosaur's claw was nothing to this colossus. The real reason was that the spiritual energy was in disorder, and the backlash damage caused by the mutual collision. Taking advantage of the pterosaur's weakness, Bai Xiaowen flipped his wrist, and crackling thunder energy began to converge in his palm. Kits was so scared that he dodged to the side. Third-rank thunder technique, primordial thunder. Also known as palm thunder, it was an important offensive technique of Taoist cultivators, and its power was displayed for the first time. A glaring bolt of lightning struck the injured pterosaur with a loud bang. Once again, the pterosaur's health value fell by about 10%. Its skin is really rough and its flesh is thick. It can be imagined that the effects of physical attacks are even worse. Bai Xiaowen thought to himself, then condensed a second palm thunder. But the toothless pterosaur, who was in severe pain, opened its sharp beak towards the cave entrance, and suddenly, a ring-shaped sound wave rushed out. Chapter 16:12. The ring-shaped sound wave was extremely fast. Fortunately, Bai Xiaowen had been using the Eye of Evolution to keep an eye on the toothless pterosaur. When the spiritual energy within its body was gathering towards its throat, Bai Xiaowen was already prepared, and activated the substitution technique in advance. With a boom, Bai Xiaowen's body exploded into pieces, turning into a tattered scarecrow that rapidly fell down. Bai Xiaowen, on the other hand, had already moved several zhang away. He could feel the remaining might of the ring-shaped sound wave. That sharp feeling of being blown by a blade caused Bai Xiaowen to be secretly shocked. Kits was a bit more miserable. After receiving Bai Xiaowen's order to escape, he was a split second too late, and before he could escape the effective attack range, the toothless pterosaur's sound wave attack had already been shot out. Kits was locked onto by the powerful energy of the sound wave, and it was as though he had a mountain on his back. When the sound wave truly arrived, he was only able to move about a meter or so. With a ripping sound, one of Kit's arms and half a leg was directly shattered by the sound wave, and blood splattered everywhere. Ouch, 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 ouch. Kits cried out in pain, and then scratched his head. Huh. It doesn't seem to hurt that much. As he spoke, blood converged on Kit's arms and legs, and they actually regrew. However, his health had also directly fallen by 27%, and his originally somewhat pale complexion had become deathly pale. Bai Xiaowen said indifferently, "The fact that you're still feeling pain right now is a psychological effect. You've been a vampire for so long, yet you still don't know what changes your body has undergone?" Kitz thought about it, and found it to be true. After becoming a vampire, his body had indeed gradually changed. It wasn't just his sense of pain, there were also certain aspects of his physiological needs that were continuously decreasing. It had been a very, very long time since he'd had the mood to find little sisters dressed in rags to express his love. This would have been unimaginable to the kids of the past. "Boss, I really do want to be a human. Even if I still feel pain, it doesn't matter," Kitz lamented. Bai Xiaowen had already charged into the cave. The toothless pterosaur's sound wave attack just now was equivalent to a powerful move, and it was currently at its weakest. In addition, the narrow cave was a natural disadvantage for this big guy. At this moment, the toothless pterosaur had already recovered from the severe pain of having its wing claw cut off. It stared at Bai Xiaowen with its bloodshot black eyes. It had a certain level of intelligence, and from Bai Xiaowen's spiritual aura, it could tell that this despicable two-legged monster in front of it had ambushed and seriously injured it. Whoosh! Like a sharp sword in the darkness, the toothless pterosaur's sharp beak shot out like lightning. Bai Xiaowen's first impression was that it was fast. It was too fast. There was simply no time to think. It was even faster than the most brilliant swordsman. It was a simple peck, but it was terrifying. Furthermore, this time, he didn't use any spiritual energy in advance, so it was equivalent to a pure physical attack. The Eye of Evolution did not detect any clues. Bai Xiaowen didn't have time to dodge. He could only hold his Thousand Executioner horizontally in front of him and block the attack with one hand. Clang! Sparks flew. Bai Xiaowen felt a sharp pain in his hand, and the Thousand Executioner flew out of his hand. Even Bai Xiaowen himself was pushed back several meters by the force of the peck. Bai Xiaowen's strength was more than 20 points lower than the toothless pterosaur's, and his agility was less than half of the toothless pterosaur's. The toothless pterosaur's peck was based on its well-honed hunting instincts, so it was naturally very powerful. 205 points of agility, even without the support of spiritual energy, could bring unparalleled speed. In a purely physical confrontation, speed was also an effective way to increase lethality. Fortunately, it didn't use spiritual energy to attack, so Bai Xiaowen could rely on the addition of his true inner force to fight against it. Of course, if the toothless pterosaur had used spiritual energy, Bai Xiaowen could have used the Eye of Evolution to predict the opponent's attack in advance, and it wouldn't have been so dangerous. With a swoosh, the toothless pterosaur's sharp beak shot out again, still without any spiritual energy. I don't know why this guy didn't use spiritual energy. Could it have seen that I could predict the path of spiritual energy when I dodged the sound wave attack just now? If that's the case, then its spiritual intelligence is too high, surpassing that of most humans. This is impossible. Yes, this is impossible. Bai Xiaowen immediately had a new judgment. The toothless pterosaur must have made a judgment based on its beast-like intuition. After all, it didn't have the wisdom of a real human. It just made a simple comparison: the sound wave attack was ineffective. The normal peck was effective. It didn't think about the reasons. It would only use the proven attack method according to the results of the above comparison. Bai Xiaowen was still in the process of being pushed back when he encountered the toothless pterosaur's second attack. In the process of being pushed back, he couldn't use any skills. He could only take out a steel shield from the storage space, put it in front of him, and activate his spiritual energy to block the attack again. Clang! With the sound of metal clashing, the steel shield covered with Bai Xiaowen's true inner force broke into pieces. At the same time, Bai Xiaowen was pushed back again, this time by a full 10 meters. Fortunately, Bai Xiaowen was out of the attack range of the toothless pterosaur's sharp beak, so he finally stabilized himself. The toothless pterosaur opened one of its wings and stood up shakily, wanting to continue its attack. When it was standing, it should have spread its wings to maintain its balance. However, one of the wing claws had been cut off by Bai Xiaowen and was hanging limply by one side. It had become a burden that destroyed its balance. In the blink of an eye, Bai Xiaowen had regained his footing and regained control of his body. He glanced at the toothless pterosaur. Instead of retreating, he moved forward and charged at the toothless pterosaur with an indomitable spirit. The length of its neck, the length of its beak, the attack ranges, data flashed rapidly in Bai Xiaowen's mind. A beast-like instinct, then the moment I step into its attack range, it will definitely attack with its sharp beak. Bai Xiaowen took a step forward. The toothless pterosaur's sharp beak pecked rapidly like lightning in the dark night. Duo! The toothless pterosaur's sharp beak hit a tattered scarecrow. Bai Xiaowen's figure appeared behind the toothless pterosaur as if he had teleported. Dao technique, displacement transposition. Long before Bai Xiaowen attacked the sleeping toothless pterosaur, he had left behind a straw puppet at the end of the cave behind the toothless pterosaur. This was an ambush that he had left behind, and it was effective. Just as Bai Xiaowen stepped into the toothless pterosaur's attack range and was about to be pecked by it, Bai Xiaowen had predicted this and used displacement transposition on the straw puppet behind the toothless pterosaur. Displacement transposition behind the toothless pterosaur. Bai Xiaowen leaped into the air. He raised his right hand, and the invisible blade shone brightly as it slashed down again. His target was the other wing claw of the toothless pterosaur that was still intact. Chapter 16:13. After the toothless pterosaur's attack missed, it staggered and tried to turn around. However, this cave was very spacious for Bai Xiaowen, a human, but for the toothless pterosaur, it was an undeniably small dwelling. In addition, one of its wings was heavily damaged, so its speed of turning around was very slow. Chi! Bai Xiaowen's invisible blade succeeded again. The toothless pterosaur let out a sharp cry, and its health plummeted again. The spiritual energy in its body was disrupted for the second time. Its wings were the densest part of its spiritual energy. Just like the two round things between a human man's legs. In such a short period of time, the toothless pterosaur couldn't take two painful injuries. With a plop, the toothless pterosaur's wings shrank into a ball and it fell to the ground. Under the backlash of the disrupted spiritual energy, its health dropped bit by bit. Bai Xiaowen decisively waved his hand, and the invisible blade struck for the third time. Under the precise positioning of the Eye of Evolution, it hit the toothless pterosaur's heart and emptied its last bit of health. It must be mentioned here that for this kind of flying monster, attacking the heart with full health would not kill the toothless pterosaur even if the invisible blade hit and caused the most damage. The toothless pterosaur could completely seal the bleeding of its heart by squeezing its muscles and nourishing it with spiritual energy. Therefore, the two attacks on the pterosaur's claws, where the spiritual energy was concentrated, caused the opponent's spiritual energy to be disrupted and suffered a backlash. This was the key to Bai Xiaowen's victory. Boss, you're amazing. A level 17 commander tier monster was easily killed by you. Kits rushed in and clapped his hands in praise. Bai Xiaowen sighed. He had used more than a third of his true inner force. Stop bragging. Bai Xiaowen shook his head slightly. Although it was a level 17 commander tier monster, it was hit by my surprise attack first, and it was in a cave where it couldn't fly. It's normal to be able to kill it. It's not worth bragging about. If we were targeted in the wild, we would be the ones running, and we might not even be able to. Bai Xiaowen had gained a lot from this battle. After all, he had killed a level 17 commander tier monster by himself. He quickly received a notification. Fighting mastery had increased to proficiency level 2. The displacement transposition Dao technique had reached an advanced level. The activation time was shorter, the range was longer, and there was an additional special effect. The new special effect allowed Bai Xiaowen to switch positions with a moving target. No matter how fast the target was moving. However, there was a prerequisite for a moving target. In the case of a sentient target, whether human, beast, or other, the transposition can only take place with the consent of the target. In other words, it couldn't be used to trick people. If it was an object without self-consciousness, it would have to be imprinted with Bai Xiaowen's spiritual imprint in advance. Bai Xiaowen gave it a try. He picked up a small stone and used his true elemental force to carve a spiritual imprint on it before throwing it out. When Pebble flew 10 meters away, he activated position swap. In the next second, Bai Xiaowen appeared 10 meters away. Little Stone had taken his place. "Boss, that was a cool move." Keats very consciously clapped his hands in praise. "What skill was that?" Bai Xiaowen shook his head. "This is a new special effect of the displacement Taoist spell. It's not an independent skill." He flipped through the spiritual realm's rules and wanted to give the new special effect a name. Naming something was too easy. Bai Xiaowen waved his hand. "The new special effect will be called Flying Thunder God." Keats? Cough, cough, the name isn't important. The range of the Flying Thunder God special effect, the activation conditions, the consumption, and so on will be tested later. Bai Xiaowen quickly put the toothless pterosaur's corpse into his storage bracelet. "Let's sweep this cave first. If we delay for too long and its companions come back, we'll be in trouble." Keats hurried to help. He picked up the crystal clusters and gold ore materials piled up in the cave and gave them to Bai Xiaowen. Bai Xiaowen's eye of evolution swept over them. Ancient crystal cluster, strange item. Crystal clusters containing pure spiritual power. Can replace ordinary spirit crystals for cultivation absorption. Can be exchanged for 107 spirit crystals when used directly. Eternium ore, level 6 dark gold material. Metal attribute treasure. Can be smelted. Thorium ore, level 5 dark gold material. Metal attribute treasure. Can be smelted. After sweeping through the pterosaur's nest, Bai Xiaowen quickly slipped away. However, in Bai Xiaowen's mind, he was also doing a simple evaluation of the harvest he had just obtained. Eternium ore and thorium ore were both dark gold materials of a higher grade than adamant and and moreover, because this was a high-level secret realm, the ores produced were all of a higher grade. After smelting, he would obtain eternium ingot or thorium ingot. It was estimated that the quality would not increase, and it would still be a dark gold material. However, its level might increase to above level 7 and become a genuine advanced dark gold material. As for how to estimate its value, Bai Xiaowen had a rough idea after combining the market prices of materials in the Interstellar Alliance. For dark gold materials of the same quality and type, if the level was one level higher, the price would increase by 30% to 50%. If it happened to be one level higher, for example, upgrading a level 6 material to a level 7 material, then the price would increase by at least 100%, which was more than double. The other thing was the ancient crystal cluster. It looked like an enhanced version of spirit crystal. Bai Xiaowen had never seen it before. However, thinking about it with his brain, since it was said that the ancient crystal could be used for cultivation, it must be a more efficient cultivation resource, just like the difference between high-grade spirit stones and ordinary low-grade spirit stones in the cultivation of the Christian era. Such a small ancient crystal cluster could be exchanged for 107 spirit crystals, which meant that it contained 107 times the energy of an ordinary spirit crystal. Bai Xiaowen quickly thought of the value of the ancient crystal cluster. If it was used for a breakthrough, it would definitely be twice the result with half the effort. From the pterosaur's nest, he had collected a total of 7 ancient crystal clusters of different sizes. 4 of the small ancient crystal clusters could be exchanged for 40 to 60 spirit crystals, while the 3 large ancient crystal clusters could be exchanged for about 100 spirit crystals. Eternium ore and thorium ore were also of different sizes. If they were divided according to the standard of 1 cubic decimeter of ore, there would be about 1,200 pieces. All in all, the additional gains from this times rate of the pterosaur's nest were already very good, not to mention the corpse of a high-ranking commander pterosaur. After escaping from the cliff, Bai Xiaowen came to a safe clearing under the shade of a forest. He took out the pterosaur's corpse, and then began to skin it with kits and gather materials. In the end, they obtained the toothless pterosaur's beak and the pterosaur's claw, two gold-grade materials. It was worth mentioning that the pterosaur's skin was actually a level 8 dark gold forging material. It was worth a lot. The pterosaur's corpse was handed over to the butcher. Fatty happily tore and chewed on it. From his shallow subjective consciousness, there were bursts of joy and gratitude. Bai Xiaowen could even sense the content through the spiritual link. Master and boss service to me is too considerate. You even cut open the belly of the prey you caught and peel off the disgusting skin before giving it to me. I'm so touched, sob sob sob. Chapter 16-14. Master? With boss? Bai Xiaowen thought for 0.1 seconds before realizing that if Master referred to himself, then boss must be referring to Kit's. Kit's and Butcher's relationship was pretty good. Even Butcher recognized Kit's as boss. However, Butcher was still a bit stronger between the two of them. Butcher once again gnawed on the corpse of a toothless pterosaur. This was a level 17 commander dinosaur. The benefits it brought to Butcher were astonishing. Its body's muscles were firm, and its bone and muscle density had increased significantly. Its meridians had also been strengthened. All of its attributes, except spirit, had increased, as well as its spiritual energy value had increased. Spirit World Rule Notification: your summon creature, Butcher, has evolved. Its base priority has increased by 1 point. Bai Xiaowen was a bit shocked. An increase in priority by 1 point? Wasn't that a template evolution? Looking at the large increase in attributes and spiritual energy value, it was indeed the growth rate of an elite to a commander. Bai Xiaowen sized up Butcher. It became a commander just like that? If I continue to feed it dinosaur meat, will it continue to grow and evolve into something like an overlord? Butcher was like a fool. It rubbed its barren head and laughed foolishly at Bai Xiaowen. In any case, I'll feed it all the meat of the dinosaurs we kill. Even if it can't continue to evolve, it's fine. I won't be able to use it anyway. Bai Xiaowen thought silently. He actually guessed that it would be very difficult for Butcher to evolve again. Butcher had already evolved twice in the awakened stage. It had gone from an elite to a rare elite. Butcher's accumulation at the awakened stage could be said to be quite strong. With the help of the Poison Fang priest set, Butcher's role in Bai Xiaowen's summon creature army was even higher than that of a commander. So Butcher's evolution to a commander seemed to be due to eating 2 high-level dinosaurs, but in reality, it was only a trigger. The real reason for its evolution was its accumulation. However, after becoming an evolver, the Poison Fang priest set had no choice but to transform into spirit crystals. Butcher's strategic position had also rapidly declined. Now that it had become a commander, it finally made up for the weakened defense of losing the Poison Fang priest set. Kits. Bai Xiaowen looked over meaningfully. Boss? I remember that you also evolved once in the awakened world and learned the Blood God Sutra. Bai Xiaowen narrowed his eyes and said, when can you evolve into a vampire Grand Lord? Kit scratched his head. Boss, I want to as well, but I don't feel anything. Perhaps we can get some nutritious fresh blood? Dinosaur blood, isn't it fragrant? Bai Xiaowen asked. Kit shrugged his shoulders. Boss, no matter if it's the Deinonychus or the toothless pterosaurs, they don't have an overwhelming rank. Their blood doesn't have any allure to me, and can only satisfy my hunger. If I have the blood of a king-level entity, slurp, slurp, slurp. Kit swallowed several mouthfuls of saliva when he said king-level blood. Afterwards, Kits looked at Bai Xiaowen with fervent eyes. Boss, you can be considered half a king-level entity. Maybe even stronger than that. Do you want to consider sacrificing yourself? I know this request is presumptuous, but if it's boss's blood. Stop. Bai Xiaowen put his hand to his forehead and ended this unpleasant conversation. Bai Xiaowen sped along the previously surveyed earth veins. It took him an entire day and a half to finally arrive at the area where the 3 earth veins converged. Boss, look, a rainbow. Kits pointed at the sky in front of them. Bai Xiaowen narrowed his eyes. I can feel that this isn't an ordinary rainbow. It's the result of dense spiritual energy rising and condensing. This place is definitely a gathering point of spiritual energy. After the two of them flew forward for several kilometers, Bai Xiaowen suddenly stopped. Someone's here. Kits, return for now. Bai Xiaowen slightly bent his waist and lightly wiped his face. Using a transformation technique, he turned into the old evolver He Er, who had appeared in the meteorite circle of the Wuya region. At the same time, he recalled Kits. That person's perception was clearly much slower than Bai Xiaowen's. He directly flew over Bai Xiaowen's head at a low altitude. Separated by the dense shade of the trees, he actually didn't discover him. Of course, this was also the reason why Bai Xiaowen had restrained his spiritual energy fluctuations. It had to be said that the specialization, spiritual energy control, was very useful. It was also exceptionally effective in concealing spiritual energy. Bai Xiaowen quietly followed. There was a basin in front of them. The terrain suddenly caved in, forming a natural pond. That rainbow hung in the air above the pond for a long time without dissipating. So many people? Bai Xiaowen was slightly surprised. There were actually more than 10 evolvers who had found this rainbow pond. What interested Bai Xiaowen the most was that there were so many people who clearly didn't belong to the same faction. How in the world did they find the rainbow pond? Bai Xiaowen had the ability to survey ley lines. He didn't believe that so many evolvers had this ability. A tool. There must be some kind of tool that can detect spiritual energy gathering points. Bai Xiaowen's heart was slightly heated. He also wanted to do one. Although surveying ley lines could also find spiritual energy gathering points, it was time-consuming and energy-consuming. It was not as easy as using a tool. Bai Xiaowen lightly breathed in. The dense spiritual energy caused the true inner force light ball on his dantian to rotate faster. If I can cultivate in the rainbow pond, I might be able to break through to the next realm. Bai Xiaowen made a judgment. When evolvers cultivated professional manuals, comprehension was one factor. The density of spiritual energy in the outside world was another important factor. When many evolvers chose territories to live in, they preferred territories with denser spiritual energy because it was beneficial for breaking through, especially when they were just one step away. If they felt that the density of spiritual energy was insufficient and failed to break through, they didn't know when they would be able to sense it again. When one's comprehension was extremely strong, there was no need for the density of spiritual energy in the outside world to be too high. With the help of 2 normal spirit crystals, one could complete the breakthrough. For example, Bai Xiaowen had used an epic-level comprehension ball. Similarly, if the density of spiritual energy in the outside world was extremely high, it could also make up for the lack of comprehension. For example, the rainbow pond now. Unfortunately, the rainbow pond was a little small. When evolvers broke through to the next realm, they were like a black hole of spiritual energy. They needed to continuously absorb spiritual energy from the outside world. The rainbow pond was so small that it definitely couldn't accommodate 2 evolvers. If one of them broke through first and absorbed too much spiritual energy, who would be responsible for it? Moreover, the rainbow pond was too small, which meant that there was a limit to the amount of spiritual energy accumulated. Therefore, there was a problem with the order of entry. If the evolver who entered first absorbed all the energy, wouldn't the person who entered later be helpless? Bai Xiaowen observed for a while. The dozen evolvers were arguing around the rainbow mist. It seemed that everyone wanted to enter the rainbow pond to cultivate, but they were arguing about the order of entry. No one was willing to give in. Chapter 16-15. These people are too much. The longer they argue, the more evolvers will come, and my chances will be smaller. Don't they understand this principle? This was a very simple principle. However, it wasn't that many people didn't understand this principle, they just weren't willing to compromise with others. Bai Xiaowen looked around and quickly determined the strength of these people. None of them were a threat to him. I can't wait any longer. If a team of evolvers with heroic professions from the 3 major organizations comes, or if 2 mid-tier lords come, we'll be in trouble. Bai Xiaowen still appeared in the appearance of black too. He adjusted his spiritual aura to the standard of a level 16 elite evolver. The sudden appearance of a new spiritual aura attracted the attention of many people. However, when they saw that it was a level 16 elite, they didn't pay much attention. However, it was inevitable that they were anxious. After all, there was one more competitor. No one paid any attention to Bai Xiaowen. However, Bai Xiaowen, who had made up his mind, spoke first. Everyone, are you trying to delay until the experts from the 3 major organizations come? The group of evolvers paused and looked over. Bai Xiaowen floated in the air and stood side by side with these people. He continued in a hoarse voice. Now, there are a total of 14 people who have discovered the Rainbow Pond. Everyone wants to cultivate in the Rainbow Pond, but there has to be an order. A tall and thin black evolver said, "First come, first served. I'm the first to arrive, so I should be the first to enjoy the energy of the Rainbow Pond." It was important to note that the languages of the Astral Alliance's evolvers were different. Some even used extremely obscure languages, such as this black man. However, different languages didn't hinder communication. Language was only an external form of expression. The real communication was through one's thoughts. Although Bai Xiaowen didn't understand the black man's language, he could capture the fluctuations in his thoughts and understand what he meant. "You're the first to arrive? Why didn't you enter the Rainbow Pond directly?" Bai Xiaowen asked. The black man was angry. He pointed at a small group of 3 people and said, "I was about to cultivate when these 3 people came and attacked me. I had no choice but to leave the pond." The 3 of them were all Caucasians, so they didn't feel guilty. Bai Xiaowen didn't despise the 3 of them. Instead, he felt a little grateful. If it were anyone else, they would have acted decisively. If it weren't for the 3 of them stopping the black man, wouldn't Bai Xiaowen have missed? Coughing lightly, Bai Xiaowen said, "We evolvers still have to be strong. Whoever is strong enough can be the first to enter the pool. Therefore, I propose that we use strength to determine the order of entering the Rainbow Pond. What do you think?" As soon as he said that, a few evolvers who were obviously weaker than him immediately objected loudly and requested to be ranked according to time. The black man was the happiest. As for the evolvers who were confident in their abilities, they were seriously considering the feasibility of Bai Xiaowen's suggestion. Bai Xiaowen pointed at the black evolved man and said, "You, get out of here." The black man said angrily, "Buddy, do you think you're strong? We have the right to object to such a nonsensical bill." Bai Xiaowen shook his head slightly and suddenly shot out a peace talisman, bewitching talisman. The black man quickly dodged, but he was still hit by the peace talisman. He struggled and screamed, his face alternating between black and red. Bai Xiaowen didn't continue to inject his true inner force, so the black man wasn't controlled by the bewitching talisman. Instead, he was stunned on the spot. Bai Xiaowen's figure quickly flew over and pulled out his saber. The black man used his spiritual power to harm himself 3 times in a row before he regained consciousness. However, the 1,000 beheading talisman was already on his neck. You are," the black man's eyes were filled with fear. From the bewitching talisman just now, he already knew that the hunchbacked old man in front of him had priority far above him. The word Lord lingered in the black man's throat for a while before he finally swallowed it back down. Because when he was about to shout, Bai Xiaowen glanced at him coldly. At the same time, there was a warning through spiritual sense. The black man shrunk his neck and raised his hands. "I'll go, no, I'll get out of here. What a joke, how could such a monster appear? This is a lord. These 10-odd evolvers together aren't enough to beat him. Why is he still hiding his spiritual power aura? Pretending to be a pig to eat a tiger? None of us can be considered a tiger. We can't afford to provoke him. I'm slipping away, slipping away." Afterwards, the black evolver slipped away without even turning his head back. Bai Xiaowen put away the 1,000 beheading talisman and faced the crowd, revealing a kind smile. "Everyone, you have no objections to my proposal, right?" A stretch of silence. Afterwards, a few sporadic voices rang out from different locations in the field. "Agreed." Strength reigns supreme. The strong have the final say. Those who expressed their agreement were basically the stronger figures in the field. They were confident that they could contend for the top few positions. Although it was said that the top few positions weren't safe, and there was a chance that their efforts would be in vain, it was still better than delaying. In particular, the person who proposed the rule was a powerhouse. Many people stared at Bai Xiaowen, all of them secretly evaluating his strength. A level 16 elite? That didn't seem likely. A level 16 hero? It was possible. It couldn't be a lord. If it was a level 16 lord, was there a need to go through so much trouble? He could have just revealed his identity and let the others stand to the side. Bai Xiaowen didn't reveal his identity and disguised his spiritual power aura as that of a level 16 elite. This caused everyone to speculate endlessly. He also didn't dare to directly reveal the identity of the White Phoenix Lord. Now that the White Phoenix Lord had just annexed the Tang Dynasty territory and its foundation wasn't stable, who knew how many pairs of eyes were staring at the White Phoenix Lord? Moreover, if he revealed his true level, a level 13 Lord, it might not be able to suppress these people. After all, his level was too low. These people didn't know that Bai Xiaowen had the hidden strength of having two professions. Therefore, it was right to let them guess. Bai Xiaowen then announced that everyone present was free to choose and fight in pairs. The winner would enter the next round, and this process would repeat until the first place was decided. On this barbaric dinosaur planet, there were no rules, but the strong could set the rules. Now, in front of the rainbow pond, Bai Xiaowen was the one who set the rules. He also had the awareness to stand up and set the rules. This was because Bai Xiaowen was currently the strongest person present. If this dragged on, it would be the most disadvantageous for Bai Xiaowen. Then, the strong could set the rules that were beneficial to them. For example, now, there were a total of 13 people fighting in pairs. If one person got a Bai, who could it be? It was very simple. It was Bai Xiaowen. The key point was that this Bai was not forcibly arranged by Bai Xiaowen. It was the result of the free choice rule that he had set. No one wanted to challenge Bai Xiaowen, this mysterious and unfathomable strong person who chased away one person with one move, so he got a Bai. The next round was a 7-person fight. Bai Xiaowen would still get a Bai. Let's take this opportunity to observe the strength of the others. Bai Xiaowen revealed a smile. Chapter 1616. Outside the Rainbow Pond Basin, a black man was hurriedly running away, getting further and further away from the rainbow. Too scary. Too scary. I only managed to break free from his control skill after using my spiritual power 3 times. His basic priority is 2 levels higher than mine. I'm an elite, so he's actually a lord? No, maybe it's because the talisman skill he used has reached the 4-star level, so his priority is a little higher than mine. He's a hero class. But no matter what, he's a monster, an existence that can't be provoked. The black man's forehead was covered in cold sweat. Evolvers had spiritual power, so it was relatively easy for them to break free from control skills. Therefore, the effects of magic control skills weren't very obvious in the world of evolvers. This was because all evolvers had the ability to self-harm with their spiritual power. The so-called self-harm with spiritual power was actually using spiritual power to attack one's meridians and cause slight damage to oneself. This could be used to break the effects of magic control skills. The talisman's dizziness effect was also a kind of spiritual influence, so it was different from physical dizziness. Whether or not self-harm with spiritual power could break free from control depended on the priority. Self-harm with spiritual power had 3 priority levels, so it could be seen as a 3-star control skill. During the same control time, every additional self-harm with spiritual power could increase the control priority by 1 point, but it could only be increased by 3 points at most. If it was an elite class that used the charm of bewitchment on this black man, the control priority would be 8, elite's base 5 priority plus 3 skill priority. The black man would only need to self-harm his spiritual energy once to reach the 8 priority to remove the control, elite's base 5 priority and elite's self-harm 3 priority. If a hero class used the talisman of confusion on this black man, then self-harm with spiritual power wouldn't be enough. A second self-harm with spiritual power would have to be used to make up for the 1 point difference in priority. Similarly, a lord class would need to self-harm 3 times. This black man judged that Bai Xiaowen might be a lord class from the fact that he had to self-harm 3 times to break free from the dizziness effect. However, this black man didn't know that Bai Xiaowen's actual priority was king class. In theory, no matter how much self-harm the black man did, he couldn't break free from the control. So why did he break free? The reason was because of rank. Every time an evolver was 1 rank higher, they would get an additional point in the priority confrontation. This black evolver was level 15, an intermediate evolver. What about Bai Xiaowen? He was a level 13, a low-level evolver. The difference of 1 rank allowed the black evolver to get an additional point in the priority confrontation with Bai Xiaowen. That was why he relied on self-harm 3 spiritual power self-harm to break free from the talisman's control. This black evolver did not know the truth because the battle information given by the spiritual realm's rules was not that detailed. Then, did that mean that control spells were useless in a battle between evolvers? Of course. Due to the high hit rate of spells, due to the existence of meditation mastery, control spells were generally used to ensure the first strike. Spiritual energy self-mutilation required one to circulate spiritual energy in one's body and circulate it through one's body to complete self-mutilation. Of course, this process took time. Although it only took a few tenths of a second to self-harm, for an evolver, a few tenths of a second advantage was very likely to determine the outcome of the battle. Generally, when evolvers were fighting, they would use control spells to seize the initiative when preparing to deal a fatal blow to their opponent after figuring out their opponent's background. Therefore, even if the opponent was of the same template and level, the effect of control was still not small. This black evolver left without looking back. It was during his short contact with Bai Xiaowen that he felt Bai Xiaowen's overwhelming strength. On this dinosaur planet without any laws and only relying on human nature and morality, not offending the strong was the simplest way to survive. It's a pity that I was the first to find the spiritual power convergence point, but I returned empty-handed. But this distance should be safe. That hunchbacked old man shouldn't care about a small character like me. The black evolver only regained his composure after running a long distance away. Suddenly, a voice sounded in front of him. "Hey! Buddy, you're strange. Why are you running in the opposite direction of the spiritual power convergence point?" The black evolver's expression turned cold. His perception did not detect anyone approaching. If the other party had the intention to sneak attack him, he would already be a corpse. Looking in the direction of the voice, the black evolver discovered that there were a total of 3 people, all of whom had Asian faces. Rainbow Pond. "Everyone, thank you for letting me win." Bai Xiaowen's eyes were like lightning as he scanned the field. This old man is black too. I was lucky to get first place, so I should be the first to enter the Rainbow Pond. If anyone dares to disturb me during my cultivation, this old man will fight them to the death even if I have to risk my life. The cultivation of evolvers was not too dangerous. Even if they were disturbed, there would not be a situation of chi deviation. Therefore, Bai Xiaowen could cultivate without worry and did not have to worry about clearing the field. The strong people in the field were basically the top few. This order of strength was also beneficial to them, so they did not express any objections. As for the mediocre people who were defeated in the first round, they did not dare to say a word. Bai Xiaowen flew into the Rainbow Pond. The rich spiritual power formed a natural curtain that covered his body. Only a blurry shadow could be seen. Straightening his back slightly, Bai Xiaowen removed his transformation technique. The water in the rainbow pond rippled. The reflection in the water changed from a hunchbacked old man to a beautiful face. Bai Xiaowen took off his clothes and closed his eyes slightly. He only separated a trace of his consciousness outside for vigilance. He had been cultivating the middle part of the art of war for more than a month. He did not slack off every day. Originally, it would take a long time for him to break through to the middle level. However, the rich spiritual power in the rainbow pond was his opportunity to break through. Bai Xiaowen quickly entered a state of cultivation. When he drew in the spiritual power from the outside world, the mist in the rainbow pond surged and flowed into Bai Xiaowen's body through his pores and orifices. The evolvers waiting in the air above the rainbow pond were all envious. Some people were even shocked. This speed of absorption of spiritual power. It's like a black hole. It's terrifying. This old man called Hey Air is definitely not at the level of a level 16 elite. He had his strength. He should be at the hero level. The second strongest person had a look of admiration on his face. He only showed the strength of an elite, but he was able to defeat me. Senior Hey Air is too strong. While everyone was discussing, the energy in the rainbow pond was continuously absorbed by Bai Xiaowen. It was as if a powerful booster had been installed. Bai Xiaowen's progress in the middle chapter of the Art of War was also increasing rapidly. Chapter 16-17. This concentration of spirit qi is too comfortable. Give me a little more time, and I'll definitely break through. Bai Xiaowen was in a good mood. However, he could also feel that the concentration of spirit qi in the rainbow pond was slowly decreasing. Therefore, the first person to enter the pond to cultivate would benefit the most. After the concentration of spirit qi decreased, there would not be such a strong boost to cultivation. However, Bai Xiaowen soon separated a strand of his consciousness and sensed the abnormality. Someone else is coming? It seems to be 3 people. Bai Xiaowen did not pay attention to it. In any case, these 3 people would be blocked by the other evolvers waiting in line at the rainbow pond. Especially the powerhouses who were ranked in the top few. Seeing that they had the opportunity to cultivate, how could they let the people who came later cut in line? This was also the reason why Bai Xiaowen had set the rule of determining the order of entering the pond based on strength. The second, third, and even the 4th or 5th evolvers would become the enforcers of this rule. With Bai Xiaowen's strength, he could indeed chase all these people away and form a clearing effect. However, what would happen after that? Bai Xiaowen did not have any companions by his side. If he entered the pond to cultivate alone, not to mention the resentment in the hearts of those who were chased away and might come to disrupt his cultivation, the evolvers who came later might interfere with him. As for using summoned creatures, it was not impossible, but it would easily expose his identity as the White Phoenix Overlord. After the battle with the Tang Overlord, most of Bai Xiaowen's summoned creatures were no longer a secret. With Bai Xiaowen's caution, he would retreat to his territory when his identity as the White Phoenix Overlord was exposed. He would definitely not give others a chance to take advantage of him. As expected, the other evolvers waiting above the rainbow pond stopped the 3 of them. The conversation clearly drilled into Bai Xiaowen's ears. Who are you? Aya. The sound of spiritual power colliding and the spiritual power fluctuations rolled. What a terrible line. One of the top 8 in the competition was sent flying just like that? The ones who came are experts. Most of Bai Xiaowen's consciousness was used to comprehend the middle section of the Art of War and guide the meridians in his body to cultivate. There was a limit to what a split thought could do. It could only detect the situation in the outside world. Soon, a slightly arrogant voice sounded. Trash should have the awareness of trash. Don't block the way. The voice sounded familiar. Bai Xiaowen quickly remembered the owner of the voice. The leader of the Heavenly Province, Yuan Lin. Then, the 2 people beside him should also be middle-order evolutionaries of the Pan-Asian Alliance. Bai Xiaowen frowned slightly. If there were 3 intermediate heroes, the dozen or so evolvers would not be able to stop them. The evolvers who were competing with Bai Xiaowen for the Rainbow Pond slot were all elites. The key point was that the evolvers at the back of the order would not bother with this matter at all. Only a few people at the front of the order would be willing to stop it. However, that was all they could do. After seeing how powerful Yuan Lin and the others were, they probably didn't have the courage to make a move. Sure enough, after Yuan Lin revealed his identity, the second and third extras who wanted to stand out all retreated one after another. What are you waiting for? This spiritual power convergence point belongs to the Pan-Asian Alliance. Now, get out of here as far as you can, Yuan Lin said coldly. Next to him, one of Yuan Lin's companions said, "Don't worry. Let's kick out the trash named Heir first. Don't let him continue to spoil the Rainbow Pond's spiritual energy." Another person agreed. That makes sense. The 3 Pan-Asian evolvers quickly flew up. In the sky above the Rainbow Pond, they could vaguely see the black shadow in the mist. Hey Air, right? Stop your cultivation and get out. Yuan Lin raised 3 fingers. I'll count to 3. If you don't come out, I'll make a move. 1, 2, 3. Before Yuan Lin's third count landed, a surging whirlwind suddenly formed in the Rainbow Pond. The spiritual power mist hovering above the Rainbow Pond surged into the pond like a whale sucking in water. The spiritual energy concentration in the Rainbow Pond thinned at a speed visible to the naked eye. Oh no, he succeeded in breaking through. This damn old thing. Yuan Lin and his 2 companions were both shocked and angry. They were shocked because they could vaguely sense from the terrifying spiritual power fluctuations that a person with such momentum when breaking through was definitely not weak. They were angry because they used the spirit-probing needle to find the spiritual power convergence point and came all the way here, only to see someone take the lead in front of them. Attack! He still needs time to consolidate his realm. We can't let him succeed so easily. That's right. Let him miss the best time to consolidate his realm. Yuan Lin and his companions attacked at the same time. They attacked not only to vent their anger, but also because they had deeper considerations. The strength of the person in front of them should not be below the 3 of them. Now that he had successfully broken through, it meant that there was another strong competitor in this secret realm. Attacking now would disrupt the last step of his consolidation. If he missed the best time to consolidate his realm, he would have to find another place to cultivate, which would take at least 10 days to half a month. This was equivalent to eliminating a strong enemy. As for when he finished cultivating and came out for revenge, who cared about that? The secret realm was so big. Moreover, the high-level evolvers and veteran overlords would also enter the secret realm planet when the time came. After the 3 of them found their own backing, they would not be afraid of any revenge. This was the benefit of having someone above them. However, when the 3 of them attacked the black figure in the pool at the same time, a tyrannical spiritual power fluctuation suddenly spread, and then a graceful figure rushed out of the pool. The 3 long-range spiritual power bombardments were all blocked by this graceful figure with one hand. There was no leakage of spiritual power. It was as if she had lifted something heavy as if it were nothing. Overlord. Level 15, a martial artist with earth energy. Yuan Lin's 2 companions exclaimed one after another. However, Yuan Lin saw it clearly and shouted, "No! This woman is not Heir. She's just a corpse puppet controlled by Heir." The 2 companions looked at the pool and saw that the black figure sitting cross-legged in the pool was still sitting there as steadily as Mount Tai. The 3 of them wanted to continue attacking, but the graceful figure was already floating in the air and blocking them. The 3 of them were a little suffocated. This graceful woman was only covered by a black veil. Her appearance was seductive, and her figure was hot. Her eyes were without any luster, as if she was a shell that had lost its soul. This was the Sheiji that Bai Xiaowen had revived with Dark Resurrection. The original target of Dark Resurrection, the Mother of Bloodthorns, was directly abandoned. This was because Sheiji's combat strength was far superior to the Mother of Bloodthorns, but Dark Resurrection could only revive one at a time. Originally, Bai Xiaowen's spiritual power did not meet the requirements. Now that he had a breakthrough in the art of war, he finally met the requirements for Dark Resurrection. Chapter 16:18. Dark Resurrection was not the same as Resurrection, so Sheiji was essentially an undead creature. Her combat power would be reduced. However, she was still very strong. She did not hide the aura of a mid-tier lord. Yuan Lin and the other two were terrified. She can control a mid-tier lord zombie. The information we got from the black man was wrong. Heier is not a control type evolver, but a summon type. Yuan Lin's two companions asked. Yuan Lin stared at Sheiji cautiously, then looked at the black figure in the rainbow pond unwillingly. Let's retreat. Whoosh. Sheiji suddenly accelerated in the air and blocked the three people who wanted to retreat. In the midst of the rainbow pond, an old and hoarse voice sounded. The three of you wanted to disturb my training. You have evil intentions. You want to leave? Not so easy. Yuan Lin's expression changed. Sir, you have just broken through, so you don't have the ability to fight. You are too arrogant to think that you can keep the three of us here by controlling this zombie. Bai Xiaowen had successfully broken through and was absorbing the rich spiritual energy in the surroundings to consolidate his newly attained level 14. Therefore, he could not move. However, even if he could not move or use his true inner force, Bai Xiaowen could still control Sheiji to fight. At the same level, a lord would definitely be able to crush a hero. Although Sheiji was weaker after being resurrected by Dark Resurrection, mainly because her combat specialization was not as strong as before, it was still not a problem for her to hold back three hero. Therefore, Bai Xiaowen did not waste any time talking to Yuan Lin. Sheiji pounced forward and threw a punch at an extremely fast speed. Yuan Lin hurriedly used his flying shadow punch to counter. However, in the face of the dazzling fist shadows that filled the sky, Sheiji did not make any unnecessary movements to dodge. She only used a wave of protective chi to protect herself as her fists continued to smash towards Yuan Lin without any fancy moves. Yuan Lin had no choice but to change his moves. He did not want to end up in a lose-lose situation with a zombie. Furthermore, Sheiji's spiritual power quality and upper limit had a huge advantage. If they were to trade injuries, they would definitely be at a disadvantage. Yuan Lin exhaled and shouted. The fist shadows that filled the sky converged into one and transformed into a giant fist made of light. It collided with Sheiji's slender fist. Sheiji's fist was entwined with strands of black energy. With a loud bang, Yuan Lin's body shook violently as he was sent flying. Sheiji continued to close the distance and threw out another punch. She did not take any defensive actions. Clearly, he was relying on his superior attributes and spiritual energy to bully others. A real lord would probably respect their status and would not use such a shameless way of fighting. For a lord hero class of the same level, even a small injury would be a disgrace. Of course, they would not use such a method of exchanging injury for injury. However, as a corpse puppet that had been resurrected from the darkness, Sheiji did not have such concerns. Yuan Lin was very aggrieved, but he couldn't outrun him, so he could only brace himself and fight. Fortunately, the two companions beside him were very loyal and did not leave Yuan Lin behind. Instead, they joined the battle. Double enhancement, mana infusion. Demon binding spider web. A beam of green light landed on Yuan Lin's head and entered his body. It increased Yuan Lin's physical fitness and spiritual energy by a large margin. The increase was about 20%. At the same time, white spider webs shot toward Sheiji from all directions. They quickly gathered and bound her, turning her into a white cocoon. Thank you. Yuan Lin panted. Fortunately, this Lord Corpse puppet only has a strong physical fitness and spiritual energy, but it doesn't have the battle specialization or skills to match it. Otherwise, my control might not have been able to hit it, said the first companion who had cast demon binding spider web. Be careful. Companion B, who had performed the double enhancement, was a mage who specialized in mental strength. He keenly sensed that something was amiss. The white cocoon that bound Sheiji began to emit waves of violent energy fluctuations that spread out without restraint. Boom! The white cocoon shattered, and Sheiji's black hair danced in the wind. Her body shot forward like lightning. How can she be so fast? Companion A exclaimed. At the end of the day, he still lacked experience fighting against a Lord class and was overconfident in his binding spider web. Fortunately, Yuan Lin had been strengthened by mana infusion. He stood in front and blocked Sheiji's attack. Even so, he was already at a disadvantage after 2 moves. He quickly called for backup. Companion A and Companion B hurriedly lent a helping hand. One was responsible for long-range harassment and casting a debuff spell to weaken Sheiji's condition. The other was responsible for casting control skills to give Yuan Lin a chance to catch his breath when he could no longer hold on. The battle between Sheiji and the 3 hero professions left the other evolvers dumbfounded. No one noticed that the spiritual energy in the rainbow pond was being devoured wave after wave. Even the spiritual energy rainbow was gradually fading. As expected, Sheiji can't suppress the 3 hero class even with her instincts. Even with my fine manipulation, it's not enough. Although Bai Xiaowen's combat specialization had reached proficiency level 2, there was still a gap between him and Yuan Lin and the others. The gap between him and Sheiji was even greater when she was alive. He couldn't unleash Sheiji's full strength. However, it's enough for now. Thanks to the rich spiritual energy in the rainbow pond, I'm consolidating my realm very quickly. I'll be able to complete it soon. Bai Xiaowen devoured the surrounding spiritual energy to temper his body and expand his meridians. At the same time, he checked the notifications from the spiritual world. You've broken through the class classic, the Art of War, middle volume. You're currently at the beginner level. You've leveled up to level 14. As the Art of War has tempered your body, your strength, dexterity, and vitality have all increased by 15 points. Your intelligence has increased by 1 point. Your true inner force has increased by 350 points. Your current true inner force limit is 2,660 points. It was precisely because his true inner force had increased to 2,660 that Bai Xiaowen was able to use Dark Resurrection to revive Sheiji's corpse to fight for him. At this moment, Bai Xiaowen's attributes had become Strength, 94, Dexterity, 101, Vitality, 101, Intelligence, 120. In terms of vitality, a total of 45 points had been added. Only 1 point had been added to intelligence. If it weren't for the fact that his overall attributes had increased rather than decreased compared to the previous level up, Bai Xiaowen would have thought that he had been targeted by the spiritual world. Now, it seemed that the body tempering in the Art of War had been balanced. The increase in intelligence had been distributed to strength, dexterity, vitality, and other physical attributes. Chapter 16-19. Other than attributes and spiritual energy value, there were also hints about other spiritual realm rules. For example, there was a change in priority. Bai Xiaowen had already become an intermediate evolver, so when he fought against lower evolvers, he would automatically receive a 1-point bonus. There was also the middle part of the Art of War, which gave Bai Xiaowen a lot of new knowledge about observing veins and formations. Although there were no new formations, the ones he already had were strengthened and upgraded. In addition, Bai Xiaowen had also finally learned an important command-type skill, Spiritual Energy Concretion. This was a skill used when commanding an army in battle. It was an upgraded version of Spiritual Energy Coordination and Army Joint Attack. It could gather the spiritual energy of the army and transform it into a powerful skill to blast it out, instead of a primitive energy attack. It's finally over. Bai Xiaowen let out a long sigh of relief. He had finished consolidating his newly broken realm. On the one hand, it was the golden time to consolidate one's realm when one had just broken through. It was the same principle as eating while it was hot. If one was disturbed during the consolidation stage, their spiritual energy would be very unstable, and they would need to find a place to cultivate. It might take more than 10 days. On the other hand, the dense spiritual energy in the rainbow pond had also accelerated the consolidation process of Bai Xiaowen's realm. The spiritual energy in the rainbow pond was not much stronger than the surroundings. The accumulated spiritual energy had basically been used up by Bai Xiaowen. Even the fog was gradually dispersing. Bai Xiaowen bowed slightly, touched his face, and transformed into the appearance of the old man, Hey Air, again. Then, Bai Xiaowen exerted strength in his legs and flew out of the rainbow pond. At the same time, he put on his black clothes. At this time, Yuan Lin's group of 3 had been fighting with Sheiji for about half an hour. The tacit understanding between Yuan Lin's group of 3 had also improved in the process of breaking in. They had gone from being helpless when facing Sheiji at the beginning to being able to handle it with ease. Although they were unable to suppress Sheiji, they were able to use ingenious means of restraining her, causing Sheiji's attacks to miss. They were like 3 brilliant matadors teasing an angry bull. Once the bull was exhausted, they could deliver a fatal blow. Seeing this scene, Bai Xiaowen could not help but secretly rejoice that he did not use Dark Resurrection on the other protector of the Black Sky Cult, Qiu Zhenli. Qiu Zhenli's raw strength might be slightly stronger than Sheiji's, but he focused on brute strength and had a bold and unrestrained fighting style. Sheiji, on the other hand, focused on agility. She had an elegant and agile assassination style. The reason Bai Xiaowen favored Sheiji was definitely not because she was beautiful and had a good figure. It was because Sheiji was closer to Bai Xiaowen's usual tactical thinking. For example, Sheiji was still a threat to the trio due to her fast speed and her unique spiritual power that could break through defenses. If it was Qiu Zhenli, he would probably be beaten into a pulp by the bullfighting tactics. Of course, with Bai Xiaowen's participation in the battle, the scales of victory and defeat were already set. Sheiji, come back. Bai Xiaowen waved his hand. Sheiji stopped her attacks and floated back to Bai Xiaowen's side. Bai Xiaowen extracted Sheiji's soul from Death's countenance and chose to fuse it with Dark Resurrection's Sheiji's body. The soul essence was consumed, and a cloud of black fog enveloped Sheiji's delicate body. Yuan Lin and the other 2 gasped for breath, but their expressions were even uglier. Companion A, how did you finish cultivating so quickly? Companion B, damn it, give us a little more time. Yuan Lin, stop talking. After shouting, Yuan Lin whispered, remember this person's appearance, let's go. We'll settle the score with him when the Overlord arrives. Companion A and Companion B nodded at the same time and wanted to fly away. Suddenly, the radiance of incantation runes lit up around them. 4 pillars of light rose in a square and connected with each other. A square cage formed in the air and enveloped the battlefield with a radius of 100 meters. Inside the square cage were Bai Xiaowen, Sheiji, and Yuan Lin's trio. Outside the square cage was a crowd of onlookers who were at a loss. This square cage was the only talisman array that Bai Xiaowen had learned from Shanqing School, the 4 symbols array. The difficulty of breaking the array from the inside was 10 times that of breaking the array from the outside. However, there was only a crowd of onlookers outside the array. Who would dare to risk offending Mr. Black Second and save Yuan Lin and the other 2? Bai Xiaowen carefully observed the situation of Sheiji's fusion. At the same time, he said slowly with a hoarse voice, I said that you guys are disturbing my cultivation with evil intentions. You want to leave? It's not that easy. Yuan Lin cupped his fists and said proudly, Senior, the 3 of us are from the powerful territories of the Pan-Asian Alliance. This time, we were entrusted by our respective overlords to explore the Wuya secret realm. We admit that you are strong, but don't go too far so that we can meet again in the future. Bai Xiaowen said lightly, meet again in the future? Ha, remember my face. When the overlords arrive, they will settle the score with me. Is this what you mean by meet again in the future? Yuan Lin and the other 2 were shocked. They didn't expect that the spiritual power sound transmission would be intercepted by Black Second. Yuan Lin's first companion hurriedly said, "Senior Black Second, we have eyes but failed to recognize you. Yuan Lin lost his mind and wanted to take revenge on you. We promise that as long as you let us go, we won't take any revenge actions." Partner B, including Yuan Lin, repeatedly gave their word of assurance. Bai Xiaowen shook his head and sneered. In fact, he really wanted to kill these three people, especially Yuan Lin. He dared to bully his companions in the meteorite circle of the Wuya field. He must be tired of living. However, the four symbols array only trapped the three of them. There were more than a dozen onlookers outside. Under the watchful eyes of so many people, Bai Xiaowen still couldn't do it. He didn't have the ability to kill everyone present and leave no one alive. Bai Xiaowen decided to settle for the second best and gave up the idea of killing to vent his anger. He said lightly, "The three of you can leave after each of you leave 10,000 spirit crystals." 10,000 spirit crystals? The three of them were both shocked and furious. Even if the three of them pooled their resources together, they might not be able to fork out 10,000 spirit crystals. Who would be so free as to carry so many spirit crystals on them? They would convert them into battle power as soon as possible. Moreover, the price of buying their lives was 10,000 spirit crystals per person. Bai Xiaowen continued speaking slowly, "If you can't fork out 10,000 spirit crystals, you can use equipment or items of equivalent value to make up for it." Before he could finish his sentence, the ground suddenly rumbled, and the rainbow pond collapsed. Earthquake? Bai Xiaowen's voice paused. All the evolvers looked down and saw a scene of fallen vegetation and cracks in the ground. There was actually a small-scale earthquake. Fortunately, this small earthquake came and went quickly. The evolvers present were all experienced in such situations, so they were not too surprised. Bai Xiaowen looked at Yuan Lin and the other two with a smile. "My patience is limited. Make your choice now." Chapter 1620. Yuan Lin and the other two were naturally unwilling to give up. It was impossible for each of them to fork out 10,000 spirit crystals. As for using equipment or items as collateral, it would be a huge loss. Now that the enemy was strong and they were weak, it was obvious that the other party would lower the price of the equipment. The three of them had spent a lot of spirit crystals or put in a lot of effort to collect the equipment. Yuan Lin said, "Senior Heir, if you insist on extorting us, we can only fight you. You should be a summoner-type evolver. This mid-tier Lord-class corpse puppet should be your greatest reliance. However, she might not be a match for the three of us. As a summoner, your combat strength is weak. Even if you work together with the corpse puppet, you won't be much stronger." Bai Xiaowen smiled. After delaying for so long, Sheiji's soul had already fused. After all, it was Sheiji's soul and body that were perfectly compatible. You're wrong. I don't need to personally deal with you. If you can defeat Sheiji, you win." Yuan Lin was relieved. "Remember what you said." Although it was said that summoner-type evolvers were weak, Yuan Lin was still unsure about Heir. Heir was confident in his seniority and not personally dealing with him was undoubtedly the best outcome. However, the black fog that lingered around Sheiji's body made Yuan Lin a little concerned. He suspected that Sheiji had been strengthened, but looking at her spiritual power, it didn't seem to have any growth. Yuan Lin carefully sized up Sheiji and his heart skipped a beat. The only change in Sheiji was her eyes. They were no longer dull and lifeless. There was a special charm to them, as if she had a new soul. Bai Xiaowen didn't give the three of them time to prepare and immediately ordered Sheiji to attack. Swish! Sheiji took a step forward and 7 figures appeared at the same time. 7 flashes. Yuan Lin and the other two were stunned. They couldn't understand how a corpse puppet could use such an exquisite movement technique. Pop! 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 The three of them attacked separately. Among them, 3 of Sheiji's shadows disappeared. Then, Sheiji's shadows merged into one and appeared behind Yuan Lin. The invisible blade slashed down diagonally. Yuan Lin felt the threat behind him and his hair stood on end. He shouted and rushed forward. Sheiji's invisible blade shone brightly and instantly caught up. Chi-la! Blood spurted out from Yuan Lin's back. Fortunately, the blue robe he was wearing had a relatively high level of spiritual protection, which effectively reduced the damage of the invisible blade. Otherwise, this slash would have taken away half of his combat power. Yuan Lin's companions hurriedly came to his aid. Hundreds of white spider webs shot out in an attempt to tie Sheiji up again. Sheiji waved her arm and slashed out an invisible blade, cutting off the spider silk inch by inch. After a short moment of recuperation, Sheiji took another step forward and disappeared from where she was as if she had teleported. In the next second, she appeared in front of Yuan Lin and punched him. This was Sheiji's regular movement skill, inch step. It was also the prerequisite skill for the 7 Flashes ultimate skill. If he continued to use 7 Flashes and Formless Blade here, there was a high chance that he could kill Yuan Lin directly. Due to Bai Xiaowen's 4 symbols formation, the battlefield was now confined to a narrow space with a radius of 100 meters. Yuan Lin had very little room to maneuver, and he couldn't use any random teleportation items to escape. Bai Xiaowen didn't do so. On one hand, he didn't want to create a feud with the Heavens territory. On the other hand, Bai Xiaowen didn't have a strong killing intent. Bai Xiaowen was now using a transformation technique to hide his appearance and didn't expose his spiritual aura. He was quite cautious. Even if he killed Yuan Lin, the Heavens territory might not blame him. However, he still couldn't rule out the possibility that the other party would come looking for him. Don't forget that there was still a prophecy-type evolver. If they created a feud, the other party would spend a lot of money to find a prophecy-type Lord-level evolver to make a prophecy. There was a possibility that they would find Bai Xiaowen. At that time, the Heavens territory would have an extremely advantageous excuse for war. In Bai Xiaowen's opinion, beating Yuan Lin up and squeezing some benefits out of him was more beneficial than killing Yuan Lin. Killing Yuan Lin would only help Han Su vent his anger, but it might cause a strong backlash. Bai Xiaowen was a well-trained territory lord. He had long surpassed the level of killing people to vent his anger. Sometimes, patience was for the sake of a better eruption. Just like when Lord Li Weichen of the Great Tang first came to threaten him with war, Bai Xiaowen's patience had succeeded in numbing Li Weichen and delaying him for more than a week. At that time, if Bai Xiaowen couldn't hold back and used his sharp tongue to rebuke Li Weichen would have deployed a scan of the White Phoenix territory's coordinates in advance. This might have affected the final outcome of the war. Although the effect was small, wasn't the outcome of a war accumulated bit by bit? In comparison, extorting Yuan Lin and teaching the other party a lesson was a loss that didn't involve their lives. The other party wouldn't have to pay a huge price to find out Heir's background. Yuan Lin had just been injured. Now, he only had time to cross his arms and block in front of his chest. Sheiji's punch landed and sent Yuan Lin flying again. Yuan Lin coughed out a mouthful of blood. Sheiji chased after him. Her small fist followed like a shadow and drowned Yuan Lin's body. Stop fighting. We admit defeat. Yuan Lin's 2 companions shouted helplessly. If they didn't stop, Yuan Lin would probably be beaten to death. Sheiji retracted her fist and flew back to Bai Xiaowen's side. She stood there silently. Yuan Lin's body was covered in bruises. His health points had been reduced by more than half. Fortunately, he had the protective aura around him and didn't get beaten to death by Sheiji. The trio was also shocked. Sheiji's aura didn't become stronger, but after the black fog lingering around her, her combat prowess had increased by more than 1 level. They really didn't know how Heir did it. Bai Xiaowen naturally knew. Sheiji had fused with the soul stored in Death's visage. It was equivalent to retrieving her combat specialization and combat skills from when she was alive. Sheiji previously relied on Bai Xiaowen's consciousness to command the battle. Now, Sheiji relied on her own consciousness to fight. Her strength didn't change, but her soft strength was completely different. The current Sheiji was equivalent to Sheiji's body. It had fused with Sheiji's blank soul, as well as the new consciousness that Bai Xiaowen had given her through Death's visage. It should be mentioned that Sheiji's blank soul referred to Death's visage automatically formatted Sheiji's consciousness when she was alive after absorbing Sheiji's soul. Only her combat instincts were preserved. The consciousness that Sheiji had now was a new consciousness that Bai Xiaowen had given her. It was still very young and was equivalent to a 3-year-old baby. In other words, it was a version of Sheiji who had lost her memories. She only lost her memories from when she was alive, but her combat specialization and combat skills were not reduced. Of course, she might be lacking in experience, but with Bai Xiaowen's guidance, she could make up for it. Chapter 1621. Outside the four symbols formation, whoa, is the evolver called Hey Air so powerful? Their opponents are 3 heroes from famous families, but they were defeated by a corpse puppet. Mr. Black too didn't even make a move. Among the surrounding elite spectators, some of them had been beaten up by Yuan Lin's trio, so they naturally knew how powerful the trio was. Hence, they were even more impressed by Black 2's strength. In the four symbols formation, Yuan Lin and the other 2, who had admitted defeat, were dejected. Since they were weaker than others, they could only endure the bullying. Bai Xiaowen said with a smile, "If you admit defeat earlier, you won't have to suffer. Okay, now take out all your valuable equipment and items for me to choose from. As long as the total value is 10,000 crystals per person, you can leave." Huh. When Bai Xiaowen finished speaking, he suddenly felt that something was wrong. There seemed to be a strong danger on the ground below. However, Yuan Lin and the other 2 didn't seem to sense any danger. Bai Xiaowen couldn't help but think. A small earthquake had just happened below. Was it a sign of a large earthquake? However, even if there was an earthquake, it shouldn't be a threat to evolvers who could fly. When Bai Xiaowen thought of this, he suddenly felt goosebumps coming from the ground. It was as if there was a pair of eyes on the ground staring at Bai Xiaowen with a certain degree of hostility. Bai Xiaowen's heart skipped a beat, and he observed Yuan Lin and the other 2's reactions again. The 3 of them were arguing for less compensation, but they didn't notice the approaching danger at all. This was somewhat thought-provoking. Anyway, a gentleman wouldn't stand under a collapsing wall, so Bai Xiaowen couldn't waste his breath on them. "Stop, I've changed my mind." Bai Xiaowen spoke faster. "Give me the items you used to explore the gathering point of spiritual power. They can be used to compensate for the 10,000 crystals." The items we used to explore the gathering point of spiritual power? The 3's expressions changed slightly, and they were hesitant and unwilling to hand over the items. "What do you think? These items should be of limited value. You don't even want to take this loss, and you want me to let you go? My patience is limited. I'll give you 3 seconds to consider." Sheiji's delicate body leaned forward slightly as she prepared to attack. Wait a minute. I'll hand it over." Yuan Lin gritted his teeth and took out an item from his storage device. He tossed it to Bai Xiaowen from afar. Bai Xiaowen's Eye of Evolution could see everything clearly from midair. Spirit Probing Needle, Spiritual Energy Detection Item. It can locate the nearest spiritual energy anomaly. The closer you are to the place where the spiritual energy is abnormal, the more accurate the pointing will be. Bai Xiaowen scooped up the spirit exploring needle and nodded slightly. "Alright, there are still the 2 of you." He pointed at Companion A and Companion B. His companions could only hand over their spirit probing needles. Without this item, they would be blind on the dinosaur planet. How were they going to find the spiritual energy gathering point? He could only think of a way to snatch it from others. The 3 of them discreetly looked at the onlookers around them. Although the spiritual power detection items of these small individuals were poor and might not be as effective as the spirit probing needle, they could barely be used. It was better than nothing. "Senior, can you undo the formation now?" Yuan Lin asked. Bai Xiaowen nodded slightly. At this time, the strange feeling of being spied on disappeared again. It was very strange. Bai Xiaowen lifted the four symbols formation. Suddenly, the earth rumbled and shook. Earthquake! Everyone exclaimed. The sand below rose into the sky. The earth seemed to be squeezed by a huge force. The terrain rose rapidly and turned into an arch. Trees fell and the rainbow pond cracked, covering an area of thousands of miles. Amidst the billowing dust and sand, two giant searchlight-like eyes slowly opened. An indescribable pressure spread throughout the area. No, it's not an earthquake. I can't move. What kind of monster is this? Whether it was the onlookers around or Yuan Lin's group of three, they were all shocked by this majestic pressure. They could not maintain their flying posture and fell like dumplings. Bai Xiaowen, on the other hand, did not feel anything. He even had time to use the active mode of the Eye of Evolution to observe the two giant searchlight-like eyes. Atli Lan Thor, God's Descendant level 18, race, God's Descendant, Ancient Dragon/Plesiosaur, attributes, STR 550, DX 350, Con 600, WIL 150, Health, 100%, Spiritual Energy, 9,700, Bai Xiaowen was shocked. This was a high-level God's Descendant creature. Not to mention the fact that its spiritual energy was close to 10,000 points, just its attributes alone were 5 times more than Bai Xiaowen's, which showed how powerful it was. As for Yuan Lin and the others, the reason was very simple. It was the effect of the God's Descendant's level suppression. God's Descendant creatures had a level suppression effect on other creatures, let alone a high-level God's Descendant. Yuan Lin and the others were only mid-level heroes and elites, so the effect of the level suppression was naturally magnified. Bai Xiaowen would have to bear the effects of the level suppression, but he had the hidden ability Godslayer. The passive effect was to ignore the level suppression of God's Descendant creatures, so his movements were not affected. This Godslayer ability was not simple. It could only be unlocked by killing a God's Descendant, causing 100% damage. At that time, Bai Xiaowen had coincidentally used the Luo Pabel in Guangqingzi's cave to kill Death God Nagori and obtain this hidden ability. However, Bai Xiaowen thought quickly. He pretended that he was affected and fell to the ground with a plop. He could not be too conspicuous, so as not to be noticed by this God's Descendant creature. Finally, all the sand and sand fell to the ground, and a huge figure appeared in front of Bai Xiaowen like a towering mountain. Bai Xiaowen could also see the appearance of this huge creature. It should be noted that he could not see the whole thing because this God's Descendant creature was too huge. It was probably hundreds of kilometers long. It was about the same size as an enlarged version of the plesiosaur, but it was thicker and covered with brown-yellow scales. As the God's Descendant creature Atlalanther stood up, a pile of glittering items appeared at the feet of its 4 limbs that were as thick as pillars supporting the sky. An extremely strong psionic aura burst out. Sources of spiritual energy. So many sources of spiritual energy. What a pity, Yuan Lin and the others, who were pressed to the ground by the God's Descendant creature Atlalanther, looked at the unreachable sources of spiritual energy and felt despair. They had encountered a high-level God's Descendant creature, which stood at the top of the world of evolvers. Chapter 1622. Bai Xiaowen stared at the Descendant of God, Atli Lan Thor, and his brain worked quickly. It was too amazing. It seemed that this mountainous landscape was formed when Atli Lan Thor was asleep. Its thick body formed towering mountains and precipitous ridges. Its slender snake neck coiled up when it was asleep, forming a circle of basin landforms. As for the rainbow pond, it should have been formed by Atli Lanther's saliva. As for why there was such an abundant aura of spiritual power, perhaps it was the spiritual power emitted by the Descendant of God itself. Of course, it was more likely that the spiritual power emitted by the pile of spiritual power sources under Atli Lanther's body was integrated into the pond water. That was how this strange rainbow pond was formed. Bai Xiaowen was a little scared. His Eye of Evolution did not see the truth of the rainbow pond. While he was cultivating, he had been on Atli Lanther's head, or to be exact, near its mouth. Moreover, the vegetation around the rainbow pond was too deceptive. To be able to grow such lush vegetation on Atli Lanthar's neck, this big guy must have been asleep for many years. As an evolved creature, Atli Lanthor certainly did not need to breathe outside. When it was asleep, it would converge a large amount of spiritual power. Coupled with the high priority of the descendant of God, it was really no different from a hill. Even Bai Xiaowen did not see any clues. Bai Xiaowen also understood why this rainbow pond, as a gathering point of spiritual power, did not attract the commander-tier dinosaurs. Compared with humans, the ancient dragon species dinosaurs had a strong sense of territory. No dinosaur dared to take risks and enter the territory of the descendant of God, Atli Lanthor, let alone set foot on its noble body. Since it was awake now, it was obviously because the intruding human-evolved creature had disturbed its sleep. All of a sudden, a loud roar that sounded like a great bell rang out. Atli Lanthor let out a soul-shaking roar. Nearby, it was as if a level 12 typhoon was blowing. Sand and stones flew, and trees fell. The ears of the evolved creatures were ringing from the terrifying sound wave. Those who were slightly weaker even bled from their 7 orifices. This was the roar of the overlord of the dinosaur planet and the Blacktooth secret realm. As a level 18 descendant of God, Atli Lanthor was almost at the peak of the evolved creatures. Of course, it was also the top existence on the dinosaur planet. The sound of running footsteps faintly came from afar. The dinosaurs were startled and fled further away. Atli Lanthar's vertical pupils seemed to glance downward. Bai Xiaowen inexplicably saw indifference in her eyes. Seeing this human-like expression, Bai Xiaowen was slightly shocked. This divine beast must have a high level of intelligence. It would not be an exaggeration to say that it was smarter than human beings. However, indifference didn't mean disregard. Atli Lanthor lifted his mountain-like leg and stomped down. After. Was. It. This had nothing to do with good or evil. In fact, the long-necked dragon's temperament was not fierce. But for him to kill Bai Xiaowen and the others was like a human swatting an annoying mosquito. It was the most normal behavior. Yuan Lin and the others were horrified when they saw the giant foot that was like a divine punishment descending from the heavens. They couldn't move their bodies. Spiritual power self-mutilation once. Spiritual power self-mutilation twice. Spiritual power self-mutilation 3 times, but it was useless. Originally, as a hero, Yuan Lin, who self-mutilated his spiritual power 3 times, was equivalent to using a control removal skill with a priority as high as 11 points, a hero's basic 6 points, self-mutilation of spiritual power 3 points, and 2 additional self-mutilation of spiritual power 2 points. The rank suppression of the descendant of God, Atli Lanthor, was not a special skill. It was just an instinctive suppression that originated from the rank. Only its basic priority was taken into account. The basic priority of a descendant of God in the evolved stage was 9 points. Including the additional priority suppression of a high-level creature over a mid-level creature, it was only 10 points. In theory, a hero like Yuan Lin could get rid of the rank suppression after self-mutilating his spiritual power twice. An elite class could also get rid of the rank suppression after self-mutilating his spiritual power 3 times. But, the rank suppression was an instinctive suppression. It was considered a continuous aura effect. As long as Atli Lanthor did not restrain his suppression, this rank suppression would always exist. Evolvers who used self-mutilation to temporarily get rid of the control would be affected by the rank suppression effect again before they could move. This type of aura was just that overbearing. Yuan Lin and the others had tried to use random teleportation items to escape. The answer was that it was useless, and they didn't know the reason. Therefore, they could only watch helplessly as they welcomed death. Bai Xiaowen narrowed his eyes and suddenly attacked. His spiritual power transformed into a dozen ropes that wrapped around Yuan Lin and the others. Then, he exerted force and threw them in different directions. At the same time, Bai Xiaowen mixed in with these people and escaped from the trampling range of Atli Lanthar's giant foot. Boom! When the giant foot landed, the airwaves spread and brought about a terrifying hurricane. The group of evolvers in the air was blown away in all directions. Among them, 4 evolvers, including Yuan Lin, fell in the direction of Atli Lanther's tail. In the next second, a giant tail hundreds of kilometers long lashed out and accurately hit the 4 evolvers, turning them into a bloody mist. Although it was said to be extremely accurate, there was no need to aim at all. Atli Lanther's tail was too thick with a diameter of thousands of meters. To Yuan Lin and the others, it was like a mountain wall slapping them. Even if they weren't affected by the rank suppression, it would be difficult to dodge. As expected, the direction of the tail seems safe, but it's actually the most dangerous. His tail is probably one of the most agile parts of his body. The lashing speed is 10 times faster than the trampling speed. Although the damage from the tail's lashing was not as high as the giant foot's trampling, it made no difference to these evolvers. 10,000 points of damage meant death. 100,000 points of damage meant death. Bai Xiaowen pretended to be blown away by the hurricane, but in fact, he flew toward Atli Lanther's abdomen. He could feel that Atli Lanther's attention was still on him. It was probably because he absorbed the energy of the rainbow pond and was the culprit who woke up Atli Lanthor that he received this special treatment. Previously, when he asked Yuan Lin and the others for the spirit-exploring needles, he felt like he was being secretly watched. However, Yuan Lin and the others didn't feel anything, which was enough to prove this point. From the beginning, Bai Xiaowen's idea was to escape. He threw Yuan Lin and the other evolvers out not to save people, but to use them to test the waters and distract Atli Lanther's attention at the same time. Bai Xiaowen's biggest advantage was that he wasn't afraid of the rank suppression of the demigod and had a good escape ability. As for escaping, he was quite confident in himself. Chapter 1623. As for relying on the Godslayer's ability to counterattack? What a joke! Bai Xiaowen was not the hero of a hot-blooded manga. He was not naive enough to think that he could defeat a deity creature with the hidden ability of the Godslayer. Indeed, on the surface, Bai Xiaowen had the Eye of Evolution and could see Atli Lanther's vital points. Then, with the tactical design, it would not be a problem to hit the same vital point of Atli Lanthor twice. There was also the Invisible Blade, a skill that specialized in attacking the weak points. After hitting the same vital point multiple times, he could activate the Godslayer's active ability, carry out a will judgment, and kill Atli Lanthor. It seemed that all the elements were present. But in reality, the possibility of success was less than 1%. First, there was the problem of the will judgment. Bai Xiaowen did not think that he could win against this deity that had lived for hundreds or even thousands of years in terms of will. Although the will judgment was related to mental strength, Atli Lanther's mental strength was much higher than Bai Xiaowen's. Taking a step back, even if Bai Xiaowen could succeed in the will judgment, what was the premise? To hit the same vital point of Atli Lanthor more than twice, he had to break through its defense. The biggest problem was that Bai Xiaowen did not think that he could break through its defense. Not to mention the Invisible Blade, which was only a mid-level lord's ultimate skill, Bai Xiaowen had not mastered it yet. It was already difficult to cut open the skin of a high-level commander dinosaur like the toothless pterosaur, let alone a deity creature that was 3 levels higher than the commander. If he could not break through its defense, how could he activate the Godslayer's ability? He did not even have the chance to use the will judgment. Finally, taking a step back, even if Bai Xiaowen could kill Atli Lanthor, so what? The price of using the Godslayer's ability was heavy. In the next month, Bai Xiaowen would enter a state of disability. His health value would be reduced to 99%. It would be good enough if he did not pass out. How could he survive on this dangerous dinosaur planet and return to the White Phoenix territory? He would only benefit others. Therefore, from the very beginning, Bai Xiaowen had already decided that he would not take the risk to challenge this high-level deity. His top priority was to escape. Of course, Atli Lanthor did not know that Bai Xiaowen was not affected by rank suppression. This was Bai Xiaowen's advantage. He could even use this advantage to gain some extra benefits. Beneath Atli Lanthar's feet was a pile of spirit energy sources. While Atli Lanthor was asleep, he was still guarding the great treasure under his head. Do you want money or your life? This is an old topic. Bai Xiaowen's answer was, he wanted all of them. Bai Xiaowen flew under Atli Lanthar's belly. This place was very safe. The height of Atli Lanthar's legs was at least 10 kilometers, so there was quite a lot of space under its belly. Atli Lanthar's huge body was also a limitation. Although he had 350 points of dexterity, it would take him more than 10 seconds to complete the simple action of bending his legs and lying down. Bai Xiaowen had already seen through it by referring to the speed at which he lifted his feet just now. Lowering 10 kilometers in 10 seconds was already an amazing speed. It was equivalent to 1 kilometer per second, which was 3 times the speed of sound. Although strictly speaking, it could not be calculated in this way, such speed was worthy of 350 points of dexterity. He was getting closer. Closer. Bai Xiaowen raised his hand and pointed at the hill-like pile of spirit energy sources. Fixed airdrop. A ghoul archer appeared next to the hill in a daze. Then, he used the Taoist technique, displacement transposition. The displacement transposition Taoist technique, which had been cultivated to the advanced level, could be activated faster and required less energy consumption. In an instant, Bai Xiaowen and the ghoul archer exchanged positions and came in front of the pile of spirit energy sources. Then, Bai Xiaowen reached out and grabbed about a quarter of the spirit energy sources and stuffed it into the storage bracelet. Roar! The shocking roar sounded again. Atli Lanthor was enraged. When he was dealing with the dozen or so flies, he did not expect a fly to recklessly attack his treasure. Bai Xiaowen's ears were ringing, and the scenery in front of him was a little blurry. However, Bai Xiaowen felt a threat under his feet and hurriedly rushed to the side. Crack! A gushing spring spurted out from the position where Bai Xiaowen had just been and lashed out thousands of meters. The tyrannical force contained in it was shocking. Obviously, Atli Lanthor had started to get serious and used a talent ability similar to spells. It was like a human swatter when he found that it was difficult to hit a fly with his bare hands. The speed of this gushing spring spell was obviously much more threatening to Bai Xiaowen than Atli Lanthar's ordinary attack. The main reason was that it was faster. In terms of power, with Atli Lanthar's terrifying 9,700 points of spiritual energy value, he was definitely strong. Even if he could not kill with one shot, he was probably close. Bai Xiaowen avoided the 2 dangerous places, Atli Lanthar's head and tail, and flew out from his side. This was because his head was longer than his tail, and the speed of his head hunting was probably more agile than his tail. It was too dangerous to walk from the front. As Bai Xiaowen flew, gushing springs rose into the sky. They were not large-scale gushing spring attacks, but single-target spells. They appeared at the position where Bai Xiaowen was about to reach in the next second, showing Atli Lanthar's precise spell control. Bai Xiaowen relied on the observation of the Eye of Evolution and constantly changed directions to escape in advance. He could no longer feel the breath of the remaining dozen or so evolvers. They should have all been killed. Roar! There was another roar, and a thought wave was clearly transmitted into Bai Xiaowen's mind. Lowly worm! Return the treasure to the Great Saul. The tone of the thought wave was rhythmic, and the words were full of majesty. Bai Xiaowen turned a deaf ear to it. You're courting death. As this short thought wave was transmitted, Bai Xiaowen suddenly felt a great threat emerging from behind him. Under the detection of his spiritual sense, he sensed that Atli Lanthor had turned his body. His head was facing him, and his mouth was open. A terrifying wave of spiritual energy condensed and formed in front of his mouth. Boom! A blazing white, incomparably thick energy beam blasted straight out. It was about 10 kilometers in diameter. It was like the main cannon of a large star destroyer in a science fiction movie. It was more exaggerated than an anti-aircraft gun killing a mosquito. The problem was that Bai Xiaowen could not fly out of the 10-kilometer diameter range before the energy beam hit him. This is the majesty of a god's descendant. If I say you're courting death, then the other party has no choice but to die. Atli Lanthor was full of confidence, and such a thought appeared in his mind. However, the moment this energy beam was shot out, a loud sound echoed in the air. Bai Xiaowen's figure strangely disappeared. What replaced him was a ghoul archer that was blasted to smithereens. A fixed-point airdrop plus a teleportation spell. Chapter 1624. Bai Xiaowen's fixed-point airdrop had a distance limit. This distance was equivalent to the area that Bai Xiaowen's mental scan could reach. In the world of evolvers, Bai Xiaowen's mental scan could reach the area. Bai Xiaowen's mental scan range was much larger than that of elemental cultivators of the same level. This was also thanks to his accumulation in the world of awakened ones. In the Black Tide Plain, Bai Xiaowen went on a hunger strike due to his greed, which led to a spiritual sublimation. Since then, the range of his mental skin had greatly increased. Now that it had evolved into a spiritual scan, the range was much larger than the original mental scan. Moreover, when the range of his mental scan was changed to a linear scan in a single direction, which was to say, when the pot lid mode was changed to the antenna mode, the scanning range in a single direction was further. This also meant that the fixed-point airdrop range was further, which could extend to more than 10 kilometers. Otherwise, it would be really difficult to get rid of the energy bombardment with a radius of 5 kilometers, which was comparable to that of a planet destroyer's main cannon. Thud, thud, heavy footsteps sounded. Every time the footsteps sounded, the mountains would collapse and the earth would crack. It was as if a small earthquake was occurring one after another. After Atli Lanthor's attack missed, he directly strode forward with his giant feet and chased after them. After flying forward for a while, Bai Xiaowen used the fixed-point airdrop plus teleportation technique again. When he appeared in a safe position, another ghoul archer was washed into dregs by a sudden gushing spring spell. Lowly worm! Stop! Atli Lanthor chased relentlessly. In just 1 minute, he had chased them for hundreds of kilometers. Of course, this distance was only equivalent to the length of Atli Lanthor's body. Bai Xiaowen sent a mental wave without turning his head. You killed so many of my companions. What's wrong with me robbing a few of your spiritual energy sources? Don't be so stingy. The dead Yuan Lin and the others were automatically listed as Bai Xiaowen's companions. Atli Lanthor, worm! How dare you take revenge on the Great Saul? The demigod, who did not know the inside story, regarded Bai Xiaowen's act of snatching the source of spiritual energy as revenge for killing his companion. A black shadow that blotted out the sky descended. Atli Lanthor actually used his head as a meteor hammer. He swung his slender neck and headbutt Bai Xiaowen. This headbutt was like a mountain crashing down, covering an unimaginably large area. Bai Xiaowen used the combination skill again and escaped from the hammer. Amid the rumbling sounds, a mountain peak was flattened by Atli Lanthor's headbutt, and a small basin was formed. The battle between these terrible creatures of God's descendants could completely change the landscape of a country. Bai Xiaowen said telepathically, "You're still chasing him. If you leave without permission, your remaining spiritual energy sources will be taken away by my other companions." Atli Lanthor's huge body suddenly froze. He remembered that only a quarter of the treasures had been taken away by this worm in front of him. His habitat still had 3/4 of the treasures. If he continued to chase, with this worm's cunning and flexibility, it would probably take a long time to recover a quarter of the treasures. But during this time, the treasures in his habitat would be in a state of unguarded state. Roar! Roar! Atli Lanthor looked up to the sky and roared. Bai Xiaowen smiled slightly. This demigod did indeed have wisdom that surpassed ordinary humans, but having wisdom, thinking, and weighing the pros and cons also meant that it had weaknesses that could be exploited. At that time, Bai Xiaowen could have taken all the sources of spiritual energy. The space in his storage bracelet was enough, but he did not do so and only took a quarter. This quarter of the treasures was the bottom line that Bai Xiaowen thought Atli Lanthor could accept. Of course, if he was more ruthless, he could take 30% or 40% of the treasures. But the danger of Atli Lanthor chasing after him at all costs would increase exponentially. In Bai Xiaowen's eyes, all possibilities could be calculated. The probability of Atli Lanthor chasing after him was equal to the number of treasures taken away, plus the hatred of being fooled, divided by the number of treasures left. These were the three main values. There were also the distribution of surrounding monsters, the probability of other evolvers, which was the degree of threat to the remaining sources of spiritual energy, and other secondary values. Among them, the hatred of being fooled variable was based on Atli Lanthor's level of wisdom. It could not be controlled. Fortunately, through Bai Xiaowen's observation, this worm's level of wisdom was high enough that it should not be blinded by hatred. But the other two variables, how many treasures were taken away and how many treasures were left behind, were controlled by Bai Xiaowen. Bai Xiaowen's attempt to take a quarter of the treasures was also part of the calculation. It was equivalent to a trial quotient in a division operation. If Atli Lanthor chased after him relentlessly, it proved that the threat value was still too high. Bai Xiaowen would definitely give up one or two sources of spiritual energy to slowly reduce his threat value until Atli Lanthor felt that there was no need to continue the chase. Of course, the fundamental reason why he could try this was that Bai Xiaowen's Godslayer could passively ignore the suppression of the descendant of God's rank. This way, his teleportation technique could be put to good use and had an excellent escape ability. Atli Lanthor quickly made a trade-off. He opened his mouth again and spat out a second energy bomb at Bai Xiaowen. After seeing Bai Xiaowen use that strange ability to escape again, Atli Lanthor turned around and strode back to his habitat. Lowly worm. Great Saul, remember. Finally gave up, Bai Xiaowen breathed a sigh of relief, but he did not let down his guard and quickly escaped. If there was not a safe escape route, Bai Xiaowen would definitely not have taken this gamble. Now that he had won the gamble, it was naturally time to count his gains. He had forcibly seized a quarter of the spiritual energy sources from Atli Lanthor. Bai Xiaowen counted a total of 41 sources. In this way, Atli Lanthor had about 160 sources of spiritual energy. What an astonishing number. He did not know how Atli Lanthor had collected so many sources of spiritual energy. Could it be that he had turned the entire dinosaur planet upside down? It was possible. After all, a level 18 descendant of God was definitely the top existence on the dinosaur planet. There might not be any other descendant of God on this planet. That was Bai Xiaowen's guess after seeing Atli Lanthor sleep peacefully for so many years without any vigilance. There were many sources of spiritual energy, but the quality was not very high. Of the 41 sources of spiritual energy, 34 were gold, ranging from gold level 7 to gold level 9. The other 7 were dark gold, also ranging from dark gold level 7 to dark gold level 9. He did not obtain an epic source of spiritual energy. As for whether there were any epic sources of spiritual energy in Atli Lanthor's collection, Bai Xiaowen felt that there should be, but he was unlucky and did not get anything. Chapter 1625. The harvest from this exploration of the secret realm has exceeded my expectations. Bai Xiaowen participated in this exploration of the Wuyao region's secret realm. Apart from training himself, his biggest goal was to obtain a source of spiritual energy. Only when they had enough sources of spiritual energy could the lords unleash their greatest strength in the prime material plane. This was especially true for a control-type evolver like Bai Xiaowen. Because the source of spiritual energy was a psychic medium, it could be used as a medium to summon the territory's army from a distance. Now, Bai Xiaowen had obtained 41 sources of spiritual energy and cultivated to level 14, the level of an intermediate evolver. The price he paid was only 7 ghoul archers, and he could summon them again very soon. He had exceeded his goal. Even if he returned now, it could be considered a successful exploration. The only thing that exceeded Bai Xiaowen's expectations was that he did not have any extra true inner force to maintain the transformation technique while escaping, so he revealed his original appearance in front of Atli Lan Thor. However, this was not a big problem. At that time, Yuan Lin and the others had already been wiped out. Moreover, Atli Lan Thor did not know Bai Xiaowen, let alone care about his identity as the White Phoenix Lord. The art of transformation was meaningless to him. In his eyes, Bai Xiaowen, who had a beautiful face, was no different from the hunchbacked old man, He Er. They were both humans on Earth, but it was possible to have face blindness when looking at other species, let alone different races. When Atli Lan Thor said that he remembered, he should have remembered the characteristics of Bai Xiaowen's spiritual aura. This was more accurate than the DNA identification of modern technology on Earth. Although some people were able to disguise their spiritual aura through special cultivation techniques, they could only deceive opponents whose priority was lower than theirs. For a god's descendant like Atli Lan Thor, who had a top-notch template, basically no one could disguise their spiritual aura in front of him. If he remembers it, then so be it. Anyway, I don't plan to stay on this dinosaur planet for long. I'll leave after making a fortune. Bai Xiaowen was not worried. However, Bai Xiaowen did not plan to return now. After all, there were still a few days before the high-level evolvers and veteran lords entered the territory. At this time, Bai Xiaowen's strength was far superior to the other evolvers. Other than being wary of those powerful dinosaurs, Bai Xiaowen could also gain a lot of benefits. Furthermore, the other loot he had obtained from the Rainbow Pond was the spirit-searching needle that he had snatched from Yuan Lin and the other two. With the spirit-probing needle, coupled with Bai Xiaowen's knowledge of earth veins, his progress in finding the next gathering point of spiritual power would definitely be much faster. Bai Xiaowen took out the spirit-searching needle and injected his true inner force into it. The shape of the spirit-probing needle was like a magnified compass with a miniature map at its base. After injecting spiritual energy, the miniature map would enlarge and display the current location. The compass would also begin to rotate and automatically detect the abnormal situation of the surrounding spiritual energy. Generally speaking, this kind of tool was used to survey the spirit crystal veins in the territory. However, there would also be abnormal spirit energy at the gathering point, so the spirit-probing needle was very suitable for exploring secret realms. The spirit-probing needle used by Yuan Lin was quite sensitive and definitely not comparable to the survey tools in the hands of individual investors. Bai Xiaowen injected a trace of true inner force into the spirit-probing needle. Immediately, the spirit-probing needle flashed and an illusory topographic map appeared. Most of the map was blank. Only a small portion of the map had rough topography of mountains, hills, and forests. It was obvious that Yuan Lin had left behind traces of his spiritual energy. Bai Xiaowen tried it and found that he could control the trace of true inner force in the spirit-probing needle. He could delete, smear, or draw the miniature map with just a thought. It was very convenient. I don't know how this spirit-probing needle was made. It doesn't seem like a tool from the spirit realm. Is it the Interstellar Alliance's psionic technology? Bai Xiaowen thought of the screw cap that Camille had given him to use for spatial locking. The Interstellar Alliance had quite a lot of secrets. Bai Xiaowen tossed this thought aside and carefully observed the miniature map that Yuan Lin had already explored. There were two places where Yuan Lin had left triangles as special markings. Looking at these two triangles, Bai Xiaowen's eyes lit up. The location of these triangles. Isn't it the Rainbow Pond? In other words, the triangles represent the gathering point of spiritual energy that Yuan Lin has found. He has already found one gathering point of spiritual energy, and the Rainbow Pond is the second gathering point he has found. Bai Xiaowen finally understood why Yuan Lin's team of 3 was the last to arrive at the Rainbow Pond, even though they had a more accurate spirit-probing needle. They had arrived later than the elite evolvers, which was the individual investors. It turned out that they had only arrived after finding a gathering point. Bai Xiaowen's mind moved and he immediately decided to go to the first gathering point that Yuan Lin had marked earlier to take a look. If it were anyone else, they might think that the treasure at the first gathering point of spiritual energy had already been obtained by Yuan Lin's team and that this trip would be useless. However, Bai Xiaowen felt that the possibility of this was very small. Gathering points of spiritual energy were usually guarded by powerful creatures. This was because the high concentration of spiritual energy at the gathering point of spiritual energy was very attractive to creatures. According to Bai Xiaowen's speculation, the dinosaur that could guard a gathering point of spiritual energy was most likely an overlord. This was because the two commander toothless pterosaurs did not have a gathering point of spiritual energy, so they could only rest in a bare cave on a cliff. The rainbow pond itself was because of the existence of the divine descendant, Atli Lan Thor, which caused it to appear that there were no powerful creatures guarding it. This was only an illusion and an example. It was not representative. Although Yuan Lin's team was a mid-tier hero-level evolver, it was still impossible for them to snatch the treasure at the gathering point of spiritual energy from an overlord dinosaur. Taking a step back, even if the guardian dinosaur at the gathering point of spiritual energy was a high-tier commander, Yuan Lin's team would definitely have a hard time. Even if Yuan Lin and the others worked together to take down the high-tier commander dinosaur, it would definitely be a tough battle. It was very unlikely that they would arrive at the rainbow pond at the same time. Therefore, Bai Xiaowen deduced that Yuan Lin's mission should only be to record the gathering points of spiritual energy so that their overlords would have a rough map of each gathering point after entering the Black Tooth's secret realm for them to conquer. After confirming his train of thought, Bai Xiaowen rushed towards the first gathering point of spiritual energy. However, not long after he started moving, the ground suddenly trembled slightly. After Bai Xiaowen used his spiritual awareness to search, he was shocked to discover that there was a group of small dinosaurs running towards them from the direction of the tremor. There were 70 to 80 of them. Chapter 1626. Rumble, the earth shook slightly as the dinosaur's claws stirred up the humus in the forest as it ran forward. This was a group of Deinonychus that Bai Xiaowen had encountered before. The individual strength of a Deinonychus wasn't strong and was only at the elite level. However, because this was a high-level secret realm, the strength of these Deinonychus was at least level 17. They were still not easy to deal with for a mid-level evolver. In particular, there were 70 to 80 Deinonychus in front of him. Bai Xiaowen didn't dare to rashly provoke them, mainly because there was no benefit in fighting them. After the large group of Deinonychus arrived at this forest, they slowed down and moved in different directions in twos and threes. They actually started to disperse and search. Looking at their posture, they were like a well-trained special force. Bai Xiaowen was shaken. He started to doubt the movements of these Deinonychus. It was too abnormal. The Deinonychus group's movements were too purposeful. It didn't seem like they were hunting. Instead, it seemed like they were looking for something or someone. Bai Xiaowen lightly jumped onto a big tree. He restrained his spiritual energy fluctuations and aura. Under the cover of the tree leaves, he silently used his spiritual sense to monitor each and every movement of this abnormal group of Deinonychus. When the Deinonychus group arrived at the forest where Bai Xiaowen was hiding, they had already dispersed in twos and threes. There were 3 Deinonychus near the big tree where Bai Xiaowen was hiding. They were sniffing left and right, appearing somewhat puzzled. Seeing this scene, Bai Xiaowen no longer had any doubts in his heart. These Deinonychus were really searching for him. Moreover, Bai Xiaowen could conceal his spiritual energy aura and hide from the detection of many powerful evolvers. However, he couldn't hide from these Deinonychus with their keen sense of smell. Seeing the 3 Deinonychus getting closer and closer, Bai Xiaowen narrowed his eyes. If I act rashly, I won't be able to conceal my spiritual energy fluctuations. It's very likely that I'll attract the dozens of Deinonychus nearby. Although I've obtained the source of spiritual energy and can summon the territory's army, it's still very expensive. It's better to use it sparingly. I also don't wish for the 5-element banner martial artists to face these high-level elite Deinonychus head-on and suffer too much damage. After pondering for 0.1 seconds, Bai Xiaowen plucked a leaf. With a whoosh, a very low sound of something breaking through the air was heard. Bai Xiaowen infused a trace of his true inner force into the leaf and shot it towards another big tree 100 meters to the left. Although his voice was low, it still attracted the attention of the three Deinonychus. The heads of the three dinosaurs watched as the leaf slowly drifted down. After discovering that they weren't looking for their target, the three Deinonychus continued to extend their noses to sniff Bai Xiaowen's scent. Bai Xiaowen turned to the right and a second leaf flew out. The sound of the leaf breaking through the air attracted their attention. The three dinosaurs raised their heads in unison and watched as the leaf slowly floated down and landed 100 meters to the right of Bai Xiaowen. This was repeated 3 times. By the time the leaves were shot out for the 3rd time, the sound was no longer enough to arouse the interest of the three Deinonychus. The three Deinonychus had already approached the big tree Bai Xiaowen was hiding in. They had clearly followed the scent and felt that the scent was getting stronger and stronger. The twitching of their noses also became more and more rapid. Bai Xiaowen shot out the 4th leaf. His target was the tree directly opposite him. Teleportation Taoist technique, Flying Thunder God. At the same time the leaf touched the big tree, Bai Xiaowen's figure instantly switched places with the leaf. He climbed 100 meters to the tree directly opposite him and escaped the encirclement of the three Deinonychus. Almost a second later, the three Deinonychus launched a fierce attack at the big tree Bai Xiaowen was previously hiding in. They had already determined that their target was hiding in this tree. With a cracking sound, the big tree was directly knocked down by the three Deinonychus. However, no one appeared. The three Deinonychus looked at each other. Their 6 eyes stared at each other. Then, the 3 noses began to twitch rapidly again, sniffing left and right. They locked onto a tree again. This tree also had the scent of an unfamiliar beast. After another attack, the big tree collapsed. A slender figure in a black veil descended. It was Sheiji. Without waiting for the three Deinonychus to react, the light of talismans suddenly rose in the surroundings. Then, they formed a simple talisman array. Bai Xiaowen walked out. "I believe that the one you are looking for is probably me." The Deinonychus still couldn't understand the meaning of Bai Xiaowen's mental fluctuations. However, they could feel that this newly appeared two-legged monster's mental fluctuations had a hint of provocation. With a low growl, the three Deinonychus began to use their hind claws to dig into the ground and lower their bodies. Is their intelligence not enough to talk? Bai Xiaowen felt a little regretful. Just now, he had used Sheiji to attract their attention and set up an illusion array around them. This was Bai Xiaowen's proud work of art. Bai Xiaowen finally understood why villains die, because they talk too much. When victory was in their grasp, the villains would link up with each other and make the righteous protagonists fall into an elaborate trap. If they didn't speak of it, they would feel as uncomfortable as if they had obsessive-compulsive disorder. Fortunately, Bai Xiaowen wasn't a villain. He had always believed himself to be a little friend of justice. The trapping array he had set up was a simplified version of the 4 symbols array. It only had the effect of isolating spiritual energy fluctuations and sound. It wouldn't trap the enemy and make them unable to escape. Whether or not it could trap them wasn't the main point. It was fine as long as it could isolate spiritual energy fluctuations and sound. Bai Xiaowen wouldn't let these 3 Deinonychus escape. With a whoosh, 1 Deinonychus acted as the vanguard and rapidly charged at Bai Xiaowen. The other 2 followed at a uniform speed, 1 on the left and 1 on the right, as reinforcements. "You're pretty good at tactics." Bai Xiaowen clenched his fist, and a glaring bolt of lightning descended. The Deinonychus on the left was struck by the lightning in his palm without hesitation. Its entire body twitched as it fell to the ground. Traces of lightning energy flowed on the surface of its body. The power of this attack surprised Bai Xiaowen. After he had advanced to level 14, the power of his true inner force seemed to have increased. This lightning in his palm was actually able to cause 30% of the Deinonychus health value damage. It also had a very strong paralyzing effect. The Deinonychus that was charging at the front directly leaped up and bit at Bai Xiaowen's throat with its smelly mouth. Bai Xiaowen saw the opportunity and directly swung out his invisible blade. Whoosh! A section of the Deinonychus head, together with its headless corpse, fell to the ground at the same time. Blood spurted out wildly. He had directly killed a level 17 elite. Bai Xiaowen looked at his own right hand. At this moment, the last Deinonychus wanted to escape, but it was blocked by Sheiji. A simple punch froze its body, and then the invisible blade pierced through its back, successfully killing it. The Deinonychus that was lying on the ground wanted to jump up and escape after the lightning energy passed, but it was restrained by Bai Xiaowen's charm of bewitchment. "Come, let me see what's in your brain." Bai Xiaowen rubbed his hands, his face filled with a kind smile. "You're tuning into the Mythic Realms YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.